Chapter 1. Wedge, Ning Xiumo, I am willing to have one person, and we will never be apart. Xia Wang, since you only want to have one person, why do you have so many peach blossoms around you? Ning Xiumo smiled innocently. There must be 3,000 weak water for me to choose, then I can decide which one to drink. The evil king casually extinguished the peach blossoms around her as he laughed wantonly. Little Xiumo, now I'm the only one left. Come, I'm ready. I just need to push you down. Text, there were no clouds for thousands of miles, and the scorching sun shone down, roasting the earth as if it was on fire. There was a tall iron cage in the middle of the square paved with limestone. Inside the iron cage lay a skinny young girl. Her black hair covered her face, and she lay there motionlessly. Blood wriggled out from under her body, forming a pool of blood. Is she dead? She should be dead. At least she still has some shame, otherwise it will be even worse. It seems that she really had an affair, or else she would not have committed suicide out of guilt. It is really too easy for such a slut to die like this. Yes, this bitch is too shameless. The sixth king is so benevolent and righteous. He knows that she is a good-for-nothing without parents and is still willing to marry her as his concubine. It can be said that it is a great favor. She actually ran out to have an affair. She really disgraced Marquis Ning. It is a pity that I did not see the scene of the chastity-testing beast tearing this slut apart. The buzzing sound of discussion was like 10,000 flies flapping their wings. So noisy. So noisy. Ning Xiumo drowsily woke up, and her ears were filled with all kinds of insults. It was so noisy that not only did her forehead hurt, even her head hurt. Which bastard dared to disturb her sleep? They are really tired of living. Shut up. If you make any more noise, I will let you all drink tea with the king of hell. She shook her head and shouted. It must be her subordinates. She did not poison them for a few days, and they dared to provoke her. She had a very bad temper when she woke up. As soon as he said that, the surroundings became quiet. Ning Xiumo gently raised the corner of her mouth. Sure enough, this trick worked. She was the boss of the Secret Service. When she was a little angry, they automatically became as obedient as chickens. That's not right. Her voice. Why was it so hoarse? His throat was still burning, as if he had just swallowed a caddy of iron sand. She's alive. She's not dead. That bitch is actually still alive. Looks like this bitch can't bear to die. She even scolded people. Who does she think she is? After a moment of silence, the discussions and insults became even louder. Ning Xiumo's body stiffened, and she finally opened her eyes. She slowly raised her head and calmly scanned her surroundings. In the blink of an eye, she had already figured out her situation. It was a hot day, and there were 3 layers of ancient people who came to watch the show. These people's clothes were no different from the people in the historical dramas on TV. All of them looked excited, as if they had been injected with hormones. On the other hand, he was like a monkey in a zoo, locked in a hot iron cage and surrounded by these people. What was going on? She was clearly sleeping at home, so how did she come here when she opened her eyes? Ning Xiumo was a little confused. She looked around and could not help but raise her hand to rub her head. In the end, she touched a handful of sticky blood. Her gaze suddenly focused on her small hand. It was a very small hand, pale and thin. There were thin calluses on the palm, and her fingernails were an unhealthy pale green. Chapter 2. This wasn't her hand at all. Although her hand was originally small and delicate, it shouldn't be this small and delicate. This was the hand of an 11 or 12-year-old child. It wasn't even on the same level as her beautiful hands of a 22-year-old girl. Was she dreaming? No, injuries in a dream wouldn't hurt, but the pain on her body was so real. Was this real? But wasn't this scene too strange? Could it be that she had also transmigrated? It seemed like she had transmigrated into another body. This was too melodramatic. What was even more melodramatic was that she had transmigrated into a child's body. In the end, Ning Xuemo was a special agent. Encountering such a strange situation, she was only startled for a moment, and her lips twitched a few times. She quickly felt the burning pain on her forehead, and her whole body was a bit dizzy. Her vision was turning black. This was the symptom of excessive blood loss. She turned over and sat up, and her left hand touched her right pulse. Malnutrition, excessive blood loss, a slight concussion, Qi Law. With a sound, she tore off a long strip of cloth from the corner of her dress and wrapped it around her forehead, bandaging the wound tightly. The surrounding crowd was dumbstruck as they looked at the girl who was like a street rat before she hit her head. But now, she was calmly bandaging her own wound as if there was no one around. For a moment, they couldn't react. The surroundings were quiet again. This girl's forehead and cheeks were stained with blood, and her plain clothes were also dirty beyond recognition. She was originally in a very poor state, like mud that people casually stepped on. But now, she was sitting there, bandaging her wound, combing her hair. Her movements were like moving clouds in flowing water, leisurely and leisurely. There was a very special charm to it. There was a sense of nobility in her elegance, as if she was a young girl grooming herself in front of a mirror in spring. How was she like a poor girl who was about to be executed? Among the crowd, most of them were ordinary people who lived at the bottom of society. Generally, they hated the rich. When they saw people who used to be high up in the air like mud at their feet, they felt a strange sense of satisfaction in their hearts, as if this made them a bit taller. Ning Xuemo's calmness and elegance at this moment was very dazzling in their eyes. Shameless. Still combing her hair. Who is she trying to show off to? She really is a whore. Even at this time she still doesn't forget to seduce men. That's right, the surrounding people began to scold her, and Ning Xuemo's eyes narrowed. Her eyes were like flowing water as she looked at the people who were scolding her. Her eyes were extremely dark and deep. When those people who were scolding her were swept by her eyes, they actually shuddered. Her heart's hard as ice. She unconsciously closed her mouth. Ning Xuemo didn't make any other movements. She was still leisurely combing her long hair. Old age tess old age. Tess age. Her. On this continent, people practice a kind of inner strength called psychokinesis. Almost everyone has psychokinesis to some degree, and even ordinary people have the lowest level of psychokinesis. Everyone says that a tiger general doesn't have a dog daughter. Old Master Jing Yuan's psychokinesis was shocking. His wife was also a psychokinesis genius, but she gave birth to a super trash daughter who didn't have any psychokinesis. She became the joke of vast sky country and the shame of old Master Jing Yuan's house. Chapter 3. The sixth prince's mother was originally dissatisfied with this marriage, but she was originally an unfavored concubine and her family had no power or influence. Considering the power of Marquis Jingyuan's mansion, she could also be her son's backer, so she did not oppose it. But she did not expect that when Ning Xuemo was 8 years old, Marquis Jingyuan died on the battlefield. Madame Ning abandoned the young Ning Xuemo and sacrificed herself for her husband, causing Marquis Jingyuan's mansion to be defeated. Marquis Jingyuan's distant relatives bullied Ning Xuemo because she was young, so they secretly stole Marquis Jingyuan's mansion's property. In just a few years, Marquis Jingyuan's mansion was so poor that only an empty shell was left. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. The servants and maids in Marquis Jingyuan's mansion also left to find another way out. When Ning Xuema was 12 years old, there was only one loyal old servant left in Marquis Jingyuan's mansion. The master and servant relied on each other for survival. They ate hungry and ate full, experienced cold and warmth, and received supercilious looks, and her fiancé, the sixth prince, was also dissatisfied with this marriage. Naturally, he wanted to cancel this marriage, but because of the emperor's order, he did not dare to brazenly cancel it. He thought of all kinds of ways to embarrass her and force her to open her mouth to cancel the marriage. But he did not expect that Ning Xuema already had deep feelings for the sixth prince. She treated him as her life-saving straw and refused to open her mouth no matter what kind of humiliation she suffered. Even last year, when the sixth prince finally found fault with her and clearly stated that even if he married her in the future, she could only be a concubine. She gritted her teeth and agreed. She wholeheartedly wanted to stay by the sixth prince's side. What she did not expect was that her infatuation did not move the sixth prince. Instead, it made him even more disgusted and wanted to completely get rid of her. He was even more blunt towards her. Ning Xuema lived a humble and careful life. She did everything cautiously, but disaster still found her. Last night, she was drugged in her own mansion, and when she woke up, she found many people breaking in. Her clothes were disheveled and she was lying on the bed with a strange man. This was a real adultery caught in bed. The future imperial concubine having this kind of scandal naturally caused a sensation in the city. This era was very strict towards women. Women who did not behave properly were often put to death. Drowning in a pig cage, burning, hanging, in this way, it would be extremely difficult for Ning Xuema to survive, not to mention being the concubine of the sixth prince. Of course, she would cry out her grievances, but there were witnesses and evidence. Who would listen to her? Without any explanation, she was thrown into this iron cage and carried to this square. She was exposed to the scorching sun for an entire day, surrounded and insulted by people. Ning Xuema's body was weak to begin with, and this kind of torment caused her to lose half of her life. In the end, she couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide by slamming her head into the cage. These are the memories of the original owner, awakening in the mind of the modern agent Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema gently touched her cheek. She knew that the reason why she had this memory was because this body contained the strong resentment of the original owner. That little girl died with her eyes wide open. Little girl, rest in peace. Since I've taken over your body, I'll avenge you. I will make the people who did this to you pay the price. A cold light flashed in her eyes. The sixth prince is here. It was unknown who shouted from the crowd. The surrounding people scattered to the sides like a tide. They made a path. Chapter 4. 36 astute and capable guards stood on both sides of the cage. 4 pairs of young girls held up the imperial canopy specially used by the princes. The man under the imperial canopy was wearing a brocade robe. He was incomparably handsome and exuded the majesty of the imperial family. This was Chongkong country's 6th prince, Ji Yunhao. He slowly walked forward and stopped 3 zhang away from the cage. He indifferently swept his eyes over Ning Xuema, his eyes filled with disgust. Ning Xuema, do you still have anything to say? Ning Xuema raised her head and her pair of extremely black eyes met Ji Yunhao's gaze. The corners of her lips slowly hooked up into a smile. 6th prince, what do you want me to say? Because she had been exposed to the sun for an entire day, her voice was somewhat hoarse. But when she spoke in such a soft voice, it was strangely pleasant to the ears. Ji Yunhao slightly furrowed his brows and choked on her question. Ever since this lowly girl was caught, she had been crying and shouting about being wronged. Her voice was hoarse and her eyes were swollen, but no one was willing to believe her words. She cried until the sun went down before she stopped. Then, she ran into the cage in despair. He thought that she had already died, so he came to take a look. He wanted to show her kindness by ordering someone to give her a thin coffin and establish his reputation as a virtuous prince. He didn't expect that she actually didn't die from running into the cage. This made him feel somewhat regretful in his heart. He thought that he would see a disheveled, filthy, and lifeless Ning Xuemo. He didn't expect that she would actually comb her own hair and calmly sit there. It didn't seem like she was in an iron cage, but rather like she was in a quiet and elegant tea house. She could even smile. Her face was obviously as pale as a ghost, but under this smile, there was a kind of luster that made people's eyes light up. He never knew that her smile could be so sweet. It was like a pure child smile, but the corners of her lips held a trace of wickedness. Ji Yunhao's heart slightly jumped. But he immediately frowned and his voice became even more indifferent. This prince doesn't want you to say anything. This prince only wants to hear the truth. Do you know your crime? Ning Xuemo simply hugged her knees with both hands and supported her chin. She replied very quickly, Xuemo knows her crime. She actually didn't cry out her grievances. Did he plead guilty? Ji Yunhao's voice softened. It's good that you know your crime. Then your punishment. Before he could finish, he was interrupted by Ning Xuemo. Xuemo knows her crime, but it's not the crime your highness is talking about, it's something else. There were others. Ji Yunhao secretly rejoiced. The more sins she committed, the more natural it would be for him to punish her. What other crimes do you have? Ning Xuemo blinked her eyes and lightly sighed. Xuemo's crime is that I shouldn't have clung on to this marriage contract even after my family situation had deteriorated. I wholeheartedly treated you, the sixth prince, as my only support. Because of this, the sixth prince had no choice but to use some underhanded methods to frame Xuemo. If this matter were to be publicized, I'm afraid it would damage the sixth prince's reputation. Now that Xuemo thinks about it, she really has sinned heavily. She spoke quickly and anxiously, like exploding beans, but every word was exceptionally clear, allowing almost everyone to hear it clearly. By the time Ji Yunhao's guards reacted and leaped over to block Ning Xuemo's mouth, she had already finished speaking. Not only that, she was clearly sitting down, but when those guards wanted to seal her mute acupoint, her body unexpectedly swayed and dodged. All the guards were stunned. When they looked at Ning Xuemo again, she was still sitting in her original position, as if she hadn't moved at all. How did she dodge all those finger winds that attacked her? Chapter 5. The imperial bodyguards looked at each other in dismay. For a moment, they didn't understand. Sixth Prince, are you trying to seal Xuemo's mouth because you have a guilty conscience? You can't say this. Ning Xuemo blinked her eyes with an innocent face. Ji Yunhao's complexion became unsightly. He waved his hand to stop the imperial bodyguards who were about to make a move. If he sealed this girl's mouth now, it would show that he had a guilty conscience. Ning Xuemo, you're the one who behaved indecently and fooled around with other men. You still want to slander me and wrongly accuse me. His voice turned cold, like a cold wind blowing. Ning Xuemo twirled her hair with her fingers. She tilted her head and sized up Ji Yunhao. Does Sixth Prince have so little confidence in himself? This sentence was somewhat without rhyme or reason. Ji Yunhao didn't understand. What? What does this have to do with this prince's confidence? Ning Xuemo blinked her eyes. You don't understand. Xuemo is Sixth Prince's fiancé. Sixth Prince has power and influence. His appearance, is also passable. At the very least, he can throw that hoodlum, Li Sanlang, behind by 8 streets. Even an idiot would know who Xuemo should choose. Why would she have an affair with that bastard and let Sixth Prince catch her in the act? Xuemo's brain isn't filled with water. Unless someone was already dissatisfied with this marriage and deliberately framed Shuama to ruin her reputation. No matter who designed this malicious scheme, it couldn't be separated from the sixth prince. Moreover, he was happy to see this result. So, don't blame her for simply dumping this basin of shit on his head. Her words were clear and logical. More than half of the people in the crowd believed her inference. Their gazes towards Ji Yunhao were somewhat subtle. There was a slight buzz in the crowd. Although no one dared to talk loudly, their eyes were like daggers flying everywhere. Everyone was communicating with their eyes. Ji Yunhao's face was ashen. Ning Shuamo, you're about to die, yet you're still talking nonsense here. Do you think you're worthy enough for me to do anything to you? Ning Shuamo nodded her head cooperatively. Not worthy, not worthy. So in your highness's heart, Shuamo doesn't even have the affection for your highness to plot against me. Then she was even more unworthy of being the prince's concubine. Wang Ye must hate this engagement bitterly, wishing that Shuamo would disappear from this world. It was Shuamo who didn't see the bigger picture. She thought that she was still the young miss of Marquis Jingyuan's household, that Wang Ye would still treat her as well as when her father was still alive. She forgot that she was just an orphan without any power or influence, so she ended up like this. No matter how people bully her, no one will stand up for Shuamo. Father's life was for vast sky country. He protected the safety of vast sky country's citizens, but once he died, no one will protect his only orphan daughter's safety. As she spoke, her voice became choked with sobs. Although the majority of the commoners hated the rich, they still subconsciously sympathized with the weak. At this moment, they saw Ning Shuamo sitting alone in the iron cage with her head slightly lowered. Her pair of big eyes were filled with tears, making her look especially pitiful. Marquis Jingyuan was once the protector of vast sky country, so the citizens respected him very much. Now that they heard Ning Shuamo's words, they couldn't help feeling pity for her. They all felt that the imperial family was burning the bridge after crossing the river and bullying an orphan girl. It was truly unkind. They all looked at Ji Yunhao with condemning eyes. Chapter 6. Ji Yunhao did not think that Ning Shuamo, who had always been clumsy with her words, would be so eloquent. Every sentence had a hidden meaning, but no one could find any weakness. This girl was like a completely different person. Was she hiding her true nature? Or was she forced to explode? No matter what the reason was, since things had developed to this point, he could not let her live. His handsome face sank. Ning Shuamo, you really know how to bewitch people. Don't pretend to be pitiful to gain sympathy. It doesn't matter if you were plotted against by others, or if you were willing. You and that San Lang were caught in bed, this is an irrefutable fact. You have lost your chastity and tarnished the dignity of the imperial family. If you really know shame, you should calmly die. That way, you won't lose the decorum of a noble lady. You shouldn't drag out an ignoble existence. This Chong Kong country and China's ancient times were similar. They had strict requirements for women. No matter what reason a woman lost her chastity, it was an unforgivable sin. Only death could wash away the humiliation. Ning Shuamo inwardly rolled her eyes. What an evil society. Damn your sister's chastity. You, this scum, are worthy of this father's chastity. Dream on. She slowly raised her head. Prince, what if I didn't lose my chastity? She was a secret agent in her previous life. Not only was she good at fighting, her poison and medical skills were also top-notch. When she first woke up, she checked her body. She was not defiled by that Li San Lang, she was still a virgin. Ji Yunhao sneered, you were caught in bed, how could you not lose your chastity? What are you dreaming about? Ning Shuamo was actually somewhat puzzled. According to the original owner's memories, that hoodlum Li San Lang was a famous playboy. He went in and out of the red light district every day. At that time, the original owner had already been drugged. That Lee San Lang had a beauty by his side, it was impossible for him not to have any evil thoughts. She did not want to know what was going on, but she was still a virgin, this was an irrefutable fact. This body was too weak. She could not use even 10% of her previous life strength. She could not use the poison that she was so proud of. Otherwise, she could sprinkle a handful of poison powder and poison a large area, letting the people of this world taste the consequences of provoking her, the thousand faces poison doctor. But now, she didn't have any skills or poison, so she could only pretend to be a coward and deal with this damned scum of a prince. She had to escape with her life first. Although it's impossible, Xuemo really didn't lose her chastity. Xuemo is willing to accept any test. In this world, there should be some elderly nannies who would check if a woman was a virgin, right? Ji Yunhao's lips curled into a sneer. Good, you said it. Then you will accept the test of the chastity testing beast. He made a gesture to the bodyguard beside him. The bodyguard nodded and accepted the order. Chastity test sale. What was that? Ning Xuemo searched the memories of the original owner. Because the original owner was an otaku, she was a pure little loli. She shouldn't know what this chastity testing beast was. The onlookers started to get excited. Some were whispering to each other, and some were excited as if they were watching a great show. There were also some who looked at Ning Xuemo with pity. One of the aunties simply opened her mouth to persuade Ning Xuemo, "Little girl, you can't pass the chastity testing beast. It's better to obediently admit your guilt and ask for a quick death. Once the chastity testing beast comes, you will suffer. Not only will you not be able to escape death, you will also have to suffer a lot." Yes, no one in this world can pass the test of the chastity testing beast. They all died miserably. "Little girl, don't look for trouble." Another person tried to persuade her. Chapter 7. Many people also joined the camp of persuasion. Ning Xuemo's words just now had aroused the sympathy of many people. They felt that this orphan girl was no different from ordinary people. She was also a pitiful person who was bullied by the privileged class. She was even worse than them. This made them feel a common hatred for a common enemy. Unconsciously, they also included Ning Xuemo in their camp. Ji Yunhao's face was very ugly. This time, regardless of whether Ning Xuemo was innocent or not, the crime of persecuting a weak girl had already been set in the hearts of these poor people. This scoundrel girl must die. His eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. On the left side of the square, there was a sudden commotion, and the crowd surged. The ancestor. The ancestor is here. It's really the ancestor. The ancestor is passing by, right? I didn't expect to have the fortune to see the ancestor's carriage today. Don't say any more. Quickly kneel, quickly kneel. The crowd first discussed in low voices, and in the blink of an eye, everyone knelt down in the direction of the long street. Even Ji Yunhao's face changed, and he led the guards to kneel down silently. The square, which had been somewhat chaotic a moment ago, quieted down in an instant. Even if a needle fell on the ground, it could be heard. On the spacious and clean street on one side of the square, pedestrians wearing different clothes knelt down on the ground. Everyone held their breath, not daring to breathe loudly. On the other side of the street, a group of people and horses was winding their way over. At the front, there were 16 pairs of boys and girls wearing light purple robes scattering flowers. Following closely behind were 18 pairs of boys wearing the same color robes. Their hair was scattered, but not a single strand was out of place. Their hands were lightly waving a horsetail whisk, which emitted a faint cold fragrance, dense in the air of the whole street. This fragrance was very faint, very light, but seemed to be able to seep into people's hearts and souls. Behind them were 16 girls. These girls wore light purple robes like clouds, and long purple muslin was tied around their shoulders. These muslins were like silk, intertwined like flowers, holding up a sky-blue palanquin. This palanquin was clearly different from an ordinary palanquin. It was the size of an 8-person palanquin. The palanquin's body was made of an unknown material, but it was completely sky blue, like the purest sky. The setting sun was like blood. When it shone on it, it did not leave any color behind. It was as if all the sunlight had been swallowed up by the blue color. An antenna-like object was erected on top of the sedan chair. This object was also pure blue, but it faintly emitted a faint luster. On top of it was a large ruby, translucent and bright, sparkling like a small sun. It was extremely eye-catching. All of the girls' faces were covered with a veil, like a mist shrouding a peony. Luxurious, mysterious, cold, it was not an exaggeration to use all the adjectives to describe this team. The curtains of the palanquin were so tightly shut that not even a corner of the person's robe could be seen. However, everyone knew that this was the carriage of the continent's most powerful god, the venerable overlord. Wherever the venerable sovereign passed, tens of thousands of people bowed their heads. Even the emperor was no exception. Regardless of whether it was the boy leading the way, the youth spreading the incense, or the young girl pulling the sedan chair, all of their footsteps were light and graceful. As they walked on the street, their snow-white stockings didn't kick up a single speck of dust, as if they were gently floating by. The venerable sovereign, also known as the venerable sovereign, was the legend of this continent. It was rumored that his psychokinesis had already been cultivated to the peak, and he was an immortal. In this world, all of the emperors worshipped him as a god, not daring to blaspheme him in the slightest. Chapter 8. He had tens of thousands of disciples, and all of them were geniuses who were second to none in terms of psychokinesis. Almost all the pillars of the continent came from his sect. Moreover, they were all non-official outer disciples. Inner disciples obeyed their master's orders and did not ask about worldly affairs. They did not participate in the political affairs of any country, and were detached from the three realms. Ning Xuema's father, Ning Luofeng, was the grand disciple of the ancestor's eldest disciple. Because he had many worries, he could not formally become the ancestor's disciple. He only became an outer disciple and learned some outer martial arts. Just like that, he became a martial god who could not be defeated by tens of thousands of people. He established his career and became a famous general. There was an immortal mountain on the sea, only in the boundless sea of clouds. It was rumored that the ancestor lived on the immortal mountain in the forgotten Worry Sea. Usually, he would not go down the mountain easily. Every time he went down the mountain, there would be such a guard of honor. His whereabouts were extremely mysterious. No matter which country he went to, he would not inform the country's monarch in advance. Often, he would suddenly appear on a country's main road, as if he had popped out of nowhere. This time was also the same. This group of people and carriages suddenly appeared on the main road, causing a huge commotion. The ancestor liked silence. Even if his carriage was walking on the main road with people coming and going, the surroundings would still maintain absolute silence. All the people of the Tian-Ci continent seemed to know about the ancestor's eccentricity. Therefore, when they saw the ancestor's carriage, they silently knelt on both sides, not daring to make a sound. Thanks to the original owner's memories, Ning Xuema knew who the ancestor was. Inside the iron cage, she looked at the people kneeling on the ground. She paused for a moment before her eyes flashed. Suddenly, she let out a long howl. "I've been wronged. Do-e of June's snow is injustice," she shouted with a flowery voice. Her voice was hoarse and sorrowful, but it also revealed the tenderness of a young girl. In the silence, her voice had a shocking effect, causing everyone to tremble. This girl was crazy. She actually dared to shout injustice in the place where the ancestor passed by, making such a loud noise. Was she tired of living? Who on this continent didn't know that even if the ancestor walked on this continent, he never interfered in the affairs of the mortal world? Not to mention a little girl being wronged, even if there were 10,000 people kneeling in front of his palanquin and crying for justice, this old man would still remain indifferent. The palanquin would not stop moving, and he might even be punished for making noise. A layer of cold sweat broke out on the sixth prince's back. According to the venerable emperor's rules, if someone suddenly made a noise in the places he passed by, the officials present at the time would be punished. The light punishment would be demoted by the monarch, and the heavy punishment would be life-threatening. He was the highest official here. If the emperor wanted to punish him, he would be the first to bear the brunt. Fortunately, he was closer to the iron cage. He raised his hand and pointed at Ning Xuemo. At the same time, he shouted, "Shut up if you don't want to die." His martial arts could be considered as an expert in Chong Kong country. Even a few dozen people would not be able to get close to him. Even if a valiant martial artist were to meet him, it would be extremely difficult to dodge, and he would rarely miss. What's more, the other party was a famous waste. The sixth prince was originally very confident in his finger. He thought that he would be able to hit her mute point in an instant, but he didn't expect that Ning Xuemo would suddenly jump forward and dodge his move. The sixth prince couldn't help but be stunned. Ning Xuemo was already holding the iron cage's thick iron bars and shouting, "Ancestor, your grand-disciple is being wrongly accused. If this little girl is wrongly accused to death, it would be a slap to your face." Chapter 9. Her words were like beans exploding as she shouted them out in one breath. Everyone on the street was shocked and their faces turned ashen. In this world, no one had ever dared to shout at the ancestor like that. This little girl really swallowed a tiger's guts. Ji Yunhao simply wanted to strangle Ning Xuemo to death. He was about to make a move to seal her mouth that did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. The ancestor's palanquin, which had been floating forward, suddenly stopped. All the kneeling commoners' hearts almost stopped along with the ancestor's palanquin. They could not help but hold their breaths. Everyone's heads were bowed even lower, making Ning Xuemo, who was lying on top of the iron cage, look like a crane among chickens. Ning Xuemo was also throwing caution to the wind. This Ji Yunhao already wanted to kill her. Even if she was lucky enough to pass the chastity testing beast's test, Ji Yunhao still had a way to kill her. In this continent where imperial power was greater than the heavens, she, a little girl who had not yet recovered her martial arts, did not have the strength to fight with this prince. An arm can't twist a leg. Therefore, she wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to fight for a chance to live. She wanted to play a dangerous chess game, to seek life in death. She opened her eyes wide and stared at the palanquin in the distance. In a trance, she felt as if a pair of ice-cold eyes were faintly falling on her body, making her heart turn cold. Since the ancestor's palanquin had stopped, even if Ji Yunhao was given 100 guts, he would not dare to make a move against Ning Xuemo. He knelt there, not daring to move again. The person in the palanquin said something to the subordinate next to the palanquin. A young boy bowed towards the palanquin and accepted the order. His figure rose, leaving behind a faint afterimage in the air. Almost in the blink of an eye, he landed in the middle of the square. That young boy looked to be around 8 or 9 years old. His black hair hung down like satin, pink and tender. He had a small white face, but the expression on his face was very calm. He stood in front of the iron cage, glanced at Ning Xuemo, and then looked at Ji Yunhao. Justice. The ancestor only needs these 2 words. If this girl is wrongly accused, immediately release her. At the same time, investigate the mastermind who framed her. If this girl is not wrongly accused and has already lost her chastity, execute her by 1,000 cuts as a warning to others. Ji Yunhao didn't dare to slight this boy in the slightest. He bowed and complied. Ning Xuemo glanced at the palanquin that was already far away on the main street. Then, she looked at the little kid sent by the ancestor, who wasn't even as tall as her. She felt her stomach ache. This ancestor was too arrogant. She had shouted herself hoarse, yet he sent this little boy over. Was it really reliable for an 8 or 9-year-old child to be the supervisor? She said, "Immortal child, this is unfair." The boy raised his eyebrows in surprise. "What kind of fairness do you want?" Ning Xuemo answered straightforwardly, "I've been wronged. I've suffered so much. I've been locked in an iron cage, exposed to the sun, and even had rotten eggs and vegetables thrown at me. It can be said that I've suffered a great grievance. If it's really proven that I've been wronged, how can it be so simple to let me go immediately? No matter what, the 6th prince should compensate this little girl. After all, this little girl is the ancestor's grand disciple. Giving this little girl justice is also giving the ancestor justice." Every word and sentence she said was under the banner of the ancestor. Ji Yunhao's teeth itched with hatred, but he couldn't refute her. The boy glanced at him. "6th prince, what do you say?" Ji Yunhao bowed. "If Miss Ning has really been wrongly accused and hasn't lost her chastity, this little prince is willing to give her the status of a concubine. When she reaches marriageable age, a palanquin with 8 carriers will carry her through the door. Moreover, it will never be abandoned." Chapter 10. Ji Yunhao felt that Ning Xuemo would definitely be overjoyed to accept his compensation. Ning Xuemo would definitely agree to it. After all, before this little girl had tried every possible way to enter the 6th prince's door and endured humiliation and humiliation. Unexpectedly, as soon as he said this, Ning Xuemo in the iron cage sneered, "This compensation is too easy. I don't want it." Ji Yunhao's expression turned ugly. "Then what kind of compensation do you want? Don't tell me you want to be this prince's official consort." She was too insatiable. Ning Xuemo's lips hooked up. "Prince, you're thinking too much. Xuemo doesn't want the position of your official consort. Then what do you want?" "If Xuemo is wrongly accused, then I ask the immortal child to make a decision and allow Xuemo to break off her engagement with the 6th prince. Let's make things clear first. It was Xuemo who took the initiative to break off the engagement. I don't want him. The 6th prince has to shout 3 times in front of everyone, 'Miss Xuemo has broken off the engagement with this prince.' This condition was simply outrageous." Everyone's eyes widened as they looked at the audacious little girl in the iron cage. Their gazes were all different. Some admired her, while others thought she was a little crazy. The immortal child found it interesting. "6th prince, can you agree to Miss Ning's condition?" Ji Yunhao obviously didn't think of this. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot, but he had no choice but to answer, "This prince can agree." Ning Xuemo wasn't finished. This little girl wanting to break off the engagement is also what the 6th prince wants. It's reasonable for the 6th prince to give this little girl some compensation. How about this? The 6th prince will give this little girl 1,000 taels of gold. 1,000 taels of gold in exchange for the position of the 6th prince's official consort. The 6th prince will definitely agree to this transaction. Ji Yunhao. In the capital, who knew how many noble young ladies racked their brains to become his official consort? This little girl who didn't know the difference between life and death sold this position for 1,000 taels of gold. Although the immortal child's face was still deadpan, his eyes were filled with interest. "Miss Ning, do you know that the position of the 6th prince's official consort is difficult to obtain?" Why are you unwilling to be the concubine of the sixth prince? Ning Xuema sat down in the cage and said, "Is it hard to understand? In fact, it's very simple. I, Ning Xuema, don't want to marry a heartless and treacherous scumbag. I'd rather have 1,000 gold taels." Even if Ji Yunhao had the self-restraint of a prince, at this moment, he still couldn't maintain his composure. Heartless and unjust. Cowardly and sinister. This was the first time little Wang had been evaluated like this. How did Miss Ning come up with this definition? Ning Xuema glanced at him. Do you really want to hear it? I think I should leave you some face in front of others. So I'd better not say anything. The anger in Ji Yunhao's heart had already risen to a height of 30 feet. He clenched his teeth. Don't tell me you can't speak. Little Wang doesn't need you to save face for him. Ning Xuema sighed. All right, that's what you said. Then listen carefully. My father, Marquis Jingyuan, saved your life, but you treat his daughter like this. You're heartless. You're a grown man, yet you force a lonely and helpless little girl like this. You're unjust. You're my fiancé, yet you don't have the ability to protect your official consort. You're being framed and framed by others. If this isn't cowardly, then what is? Whether or not you're the one behind this matter, you can't escape from the responsibility. You clearly know that I'm being framed, yet you still want to hit me while I'm down. You want to put me to death. If you're not treacherous, then who is? I don't want someone like you to throw yourself at me. Naturally, I want to break off the engagement. Chapter 11. Her words were sonorous and forceful, causing Ji Yunhao's handsome face to turn green and white. After a while, he squeezed out a sentence, full of lies. Let's wait for the chastity testing beast to test her first. A helpless little girl dared to withdraw from the imperial family's marriage. This was simply a miracle. Everyone's gossiping factor burned fiercely. The people in the square were originally coming and going, but at this moment, they could only see people coming and not leaving. Everyone was waiting to see the result. In the subconscious minds of the commoners, they all hoped that Ning Xuema would win and vent the resentment of those at the bottom of society. However, they were not optimistic about Ning Xuema. After all, she was caught in the act of adultery, and the other party was a dissolute person. No matter what, they did not believe that Li Sanlang and Ning Xuema were only sleeping under the quilt. They must have eaten her clean. This little girl was just a cornered beast. Even if she was lucky enough to preserve her chastity, she might not be able to escape the claws of the chastity-testing beast. In this world, there was no girl who could escape from the claws of the chastity-testing beast, therefore, Ning Xuema's chances of winning were very small. It could be said that there was no chance. Countless eyes fell on Ning Xuema's body. There was pity, and regret in their eyes. Everyone said that this little girl was a waste. Her natural disposition was weak and her mouth was clumsy. Seeing her open her mouth again and again, it was simply astonishing. Her thinking was quick, and her eloquence was even more amazing. Even the eloquent sixth prince was unable to say a decent word. Also, although her skin was pale and rough, it was obvious that it was caused by years of malnutrition. As long as she took good care of herself for a few years, she would definitely be tender and tender. Coupled with her exceptionally delicate and pretty facial features, when she grew up, she would definitely be a charming great beauty. Such a clever and charming great beauty was going to die under the claws of the chastity-testing beast. Just thinking about it made people wring their hands. This sixth prince was really too much. Why did he have to frame a little girl like this? Marrying her as a concubine was not bad. The chastity-testing beast was finally carried out by 8 imperial bodyguards. It was also in a big iron cage, but it was 3 times bigger than the one Ning Xuema was locked in. The red silk covering the cage slowly falls to the ground. Ning Xuema and the chastity-testing beast look at each other across the cage. Although the common people had long heard of this chastity-testing beast, there were not many people who had seen its true appearance. This chastity-testing beast was a treasure of the royal family. Only when a woman of the royal family committed a lewd act and refused to admit it would they use it. There weren't many women who lost their chastity before marriage, and most of them were secretly executed by their families after being caught red-handed. They didn't even make it to the Supreme Court. Only a few of them held on to a fluke mentality and refused to admit their guilt. Then, they were thrown into the chastity-testing beast cage and torn into pieces. Its body was as long as a tiger, and its entire body was covered in golden fur. Its face was full of bitterness and hatred, and it looked very much like a pet dog. There were 2 iron gray horns on its head, and they were shaped like deer antlers. Its 4 snow-white hooves were like fluffy furballs, and its toenails were as sharp as knives. Ning Xuema looked at the chastity-testing beast, and countless black lines appeared on her forehead. This was the chastity-testing beast? This was clearly a freak that didn't succeed in crossbreeding. It was even more abnormal than the lion-tiger beast. Its head was 3 times bigger than Ning Xuema. Its pair of green eyes stared at Ning Xuema like a will-o'-the-wisp. A bloody and desolate aura was emitted from its body, causing the surrounding common people to involuntarily retreat 3 feet. Ning Xuema, didn't you want to prove your innocence? Then automatically enter the chastity-testing beast's cage. Chapter 12. Ning Xuema, don't you want to prove your innocence? Then enter the chastity-testing beast's cage. Ji Yunhao coldly said. Could this thing really tell if a girl was a virgin? Was this a joke? Giving a girl's innocence to this thing to test, wasn't it treating human life like grass? Backward continent. Perverted rules. Ning Xuema secretly cursed. The cage that imprisoned her was opened, and the ancestor sent a boy to look at her with a smile. Miss Ning, you won't regret it, right? Ning Xuema clenched her teeth. If she stuck her head out, she would be stabbed. If she retreated, she would be stabbed. She would stake it all. She bent her waist and walked out of her cage. The imperial bodyguards opened the door of the chastity-testing beast's cage. The cage door was very small, and it could barely allow a weak girl to pass through. The chastity-testing beast couldn't come out. The chastity-testing beast was obviously excited. Its whole body's golden hair slightly stood up, and it snorted. Its 4 hooves stomped on the ground. From time to time, it would show its claws to Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema had always been bold. In her previous life, she had fought with tigers and leopards with her bare hands. However, the current body's quality was too poor. She could only use her previous life's qigong, but she didn't have the strength to fight back. More importantly, she didn't even have a sharp piece of wood in her hand. What could she use to fight with these 4 beasts? Looking at this thing's imposing manner, it was obviously stronger than tigers and leopards. If this thing didn't have the ability to verify, then it would pounce on any girl it saw. She would be miserable. She didn't cross over to feed the beasts. Her eyes swept the surroundings. There was a sea of people surrounding this place like an iron bucket. She had no chance of escaping. Little girl, this immortal boy is here. Don't even think about having other ideas. Otherwise, you will die even more miserably. If you make trouble at this time, you will become the enemy of the entire Sun-Moon sect. The boy spoke in a deadpan manner. His arrogance was even bigger than the 6th prince, Ji Yunhao. She gave Ning Xuema an even bigger label. Ning Xuema pursed her lips. Xuema is innocent, so I won't play any tricks. The eyes of the people here are clear. They all know that I've been wronged. I'll be able to prove my innocence very soon." As she spoke, she walked in a circle in front of the crowd. Her posture was like a movie star singing around the audience. She was calm and composed, and every move she made had a different kind of charm. Everyone's eyes followed her and were inexplicably attracted to her. Even the sixth king's iron-blooded guards couldn't help but look at her. The sixth Prince Ji Yunhao's handsome face turned even darker. Seeing so many men's gazes following Ning Xuemo, his mood was indescribably bad. He snorted, "Don't dawdle. Don't you want to prove your innocence? Hurry up and go in." Ning Xuemo's fingers secretly grasped the 2 iron hairpins she had just stolen. Her heart finally had a bit of confidence. She was a special agent. Her ability to steal things was comparable to a godly thief. She had just walked in a circle, so she already had a weapon in her hand. Her movements were light and skillful. Unexpectedly, no one noticed it. "Everyone, you have to testify for me. If I can come out alive from the chastity-testing beast's iron cage, you have to supervise the sixth king to fulfill his promise." Mwah. She blew a kiss to the surrounding audience. Then, she turned around and neatly drilled into the chastity-testing beast's iron cage. Although the crowd didn't understand the meaning of her last sentence, they couldn't help but cheer for her when they saw her drilled into the iron cage. Chapter 13. The other women who were sent into the chastity-testing beast's cage were paralyzed with fear the moment they saw the beast. Then, they were pushed in by the guards. But this little girl actually went in by herself. Just based on this extraordinary courage, they had to give her a thumbs up. Their full attention was on Ning Xuemo. They didn't notice that when the chastity-testing beast heard Ning Xuemo say the last 3 words, its eyes suddenly lit up. "Where are you from?" The chastity-testing beast opened its big mouth and suddenly came out with an English sentence. "Ning Xuemo." She was stunned. "The chastity-testing beast, you can't speak English." Looking at Ning Xuemo's astonished eyes, it strenuously said, "Moi moi." These 3 words were incomparably stiff, like a foreigner who was learning Chinese for the first time, speaking in a foreign accent. Ning Xuemo finally reacted. This beast can actually speak English. Could it be that its soul also transmigrated? "I am from China. Are you?" Ning Xuemo was an international agent, so her English was naturally good. It was a standard London accent. The chastity-testing beast's eyes lit up like light bulbs. It was so happy that it almost shed tears. After nearly 100 years, there was finally someone who could understand its words. Its eyes were full of joy of meeting an old friend in a foreign land. It told Ning Xuemo about its origin. It turned out that the chastity-testing beast's soul also came from the 21st century. In its previous life, it was a rebellious person from country Y. It once traveled in China and barely learned a few words of half-baked Chinese. Before it transmigrated, it was 12 years old. In the bathroom, it slipped and fell. When it woke up, it became the chastity-testing beast and was locked in an iron cage like a monkey. The people around it were speaking unfamiliar Chinese. Its mouth was dry and it spoke a lot of English, but no one could understand it. They only treated its English as a unique beast language. It had been locked in the cage alone and couldn't go anywhere. The servant who came to feed him was mute and could not communicate with him, so he could not learn Chinese even if he wanted to. He had a bad temper to begin with. After being locked up like this for so many years, he was so depressed that he almost went crazy. His emotions were like a barrel of gunpowder, exploding at the slightest touch. Occasionally, it would be dragged out to test the chastity of a certain girl. It looked at the crowd around it, and they were all talking in a language that it did not understand, which made it even angrier. When the girl whose chastity was being tested was pushed in, the bestial nature of his body flared up. He did not even bother to check if the other party was chastity or not. Without a second word, he tore the girl apart to vent his anger. He didn't know if the original chastity testing beast knew how to test one's chastity, but he didn't know how to do it. He didn't understand either. He was still a pure and innocent virgin in his previous life. The chastity testing beast had been sullen for nearly 100 years. Now, it finally met a person who could understand its words. As soon as it opened its mouth, it spilled all of its secrets. As a result, the onlookers saw such a wonderful scene. The small Ning Xuemo was standing in front of the tall chastity testing beast. She was speaking the same language as the chastity testing beast. One person and one beast chatted happily. Occasionally, Ning Xuemo would reach out her small hand and pat the chastity testing beast's shoulder. Chapter 14. The chastity testing beast's face was full of bitterness and hatred. Like a big cat, it rubbed itself against Ning Xuemo's body. Everyone was stunned as they watched this scene with their mouths agape and tongue-tied. A miracle. No one had ever been able to get along so well with the chastity testing beast. This Miss Ning had created a miracle. To be able to get the chastity testing beast's favor, it seemed that not only did she not lose her chastity, but she was also very pure. She was really wronged. Ning Xuemo resisted the urge to yawn. This international friend of hers was really a chatterbox. He almost talked about his previous life's school, grade, and even his little girlfriend that he had a crush on. Ning Xuemo admired him for being able to remember his mother tongue so clearly and speak so skillfully even though he had been suppressed here for nearly 100 years. The chastity testing beast bitterly expressed that he was afraid that he would forget that he was once a human, so he kept talking to himself. He couldn't help but ask about Ning Xuemo's previous life. Ning Xuemo didn't hide it and told him that she was a golden agent. The chastity testing beast's eyes immediately lit up. He said that he worshipped agents the most in his previous life. He had seen many agent movies, such as 007, Spy Layers, Mission Impossible. He could recite them backwards. Looking at his small eyes full of admiration, Ning Xuemo thought unkindly that she had gone to his country to steal secrets. This child idealized agents too much. She glanced at his majestic body and secretly sighed in her heart. Who would have thought that such a tall and mighty beast would have the heart of a little boy? Although he had been in this world for a long time, because of the lack of communication, his mind was still that of a child. Unlike her, a mature agent's soul lived in a lowly's body. She and the chastity testing beast chatted for half an hour. The surrounding people also looked at them like clay and wooden sculptures for half an hour. On such a hot day, everyone was sweating profusely, but no one was willing to leave. The eyes of the boy sent by the ancestor also showed a strange color. 100 years ago, the chastity testing beast had a serious illness. After experiencing life and death, its temperament changed greatly. It often mumbled various syllables, trying to communicate with people, but no one could understand. He didn't expect that this little girl could actually use the same syllables to communicate with it. This little girl wasn't simple. Chapter 15. When Ning Xuemo calmly came out of the iron cage, the crowd burst into thunderous cheers. Even the boy, who had been keeping a straight face, revealed a faint smile on his lips. Ning Xuemo smiled and cupped her hands towards the boy. Immortal child, please uphold justice for Xuemo. The boy nodded slightly and looked towards Ji Yunhao. Sixth Prince, what do you say? Ji Yunhao's face was somewhat pale. He looked at Ning Xuemo with a complicated gaze and replied rather slyly, "It seems that Miss Ning has really been wronged. This little prince will give Miss Ning a true compensation." I will thoroughly investigate the main culprit behind her death. He somewhat regretted breaking off the engagement. If he could take this little girl as a concubine in the future, perhaps it wouldn't be bad. He did not mention a single word about breaking off the engagement. Ning Xuemo was smart enough to see through his thoughts. She bowed to the child. Immortal child, you will definitely be able to carry out the ancestors' words of justice. You will definitely make the sixth prince fulfill the bet. The bet just now was that if Ning Xuemo won, Ji Yunhao would shout 3 times in front of everyone, "This prince has been broken off by Miss Xuemo," and then give Ning Xuemo 1,000 taels of gold. 1,000 taels of gold was fine, but if he shouted that, then he would lose all face. Would he still be able to conduct himself in the future? Ji Yunhao's face almost turned green. Humph, if this little girl insisted that he fulfill the bet, even if he would be silently criticized by tens of thousands of people, he would still secretly execute this little girl to relieve the hatred in his heart. Ning Xuemo naturally knew that she had no power and no influence. She also did not have any real strength, so she still had to leave a way out for others. She could not force this prince into a corner like a cornered dog. She lightly sighed and said, "Sixth prince's status is honorable. This little girl does not want prince to shout those words. As long as prince fulfills the promise of breaking off the engagement and gives Xuemo 1,000 taels of gold, it will be fine." Also, this little girl and this chastity-testing beast hit it off. I want to bring it back to Marquis Jingyuan's mansion to raise it personally. To Ji Yunhao, this compromise was indeed the best option. This is the chastity-testing beast. There were only 3 of them in the entire vast sky country, so they were very precious. One was in the imperial palace, one was in his residence, and one was in the supreme court. A dark light flashed in his eyes, and he happily agreed, "All right, I promise you." However, this chastity-testing beast still belongs to this king. You only have the right to raise it. As for the engagement, you are still young. This prince will keep this engagement for 2 years. If you are still unwilling after 2 years, this engagement will automatically be cancelled. How about it? Was the prince regretting his decision and trying to stall for time? TSK, she wasn't going to let him think about it. She didn't want to be entangled with him in the future. Ning Xuemo simply shook her head. Xuemo likes to be straightforward. Your Highness must be a straightforward person, so it's better to annul this marriage. Ji Yunhao, at this time, he naturally could not persist any longer. He could only agree to annul the engagement under the witness of the fairy child, a dim plaque, a dilapidated gate, a courtyard overgrown with weeds, and an empty hall. This was the current Marquis Jingyuan's mansion. A gust of wind blew through the hall, causing it to swirl around and swirl up the dust, causing Ning Xuemo to sneeze the moment she entered the hall. Really poor. Really dilapidated. Afterwards, the chastity-testing beast was carried in and impolitely commented. Of course, it still spoke in English. Ning Xuemo raised the corner of her mouth. Chapter 16. Marquis Jingyuan had served the country all his life. Although he had made countless contributions to the country, he was an honest official and relied on his salary to support his family. Marquis Jingyuan's household was originally poor. After the general and his wife died, all the valuables in the house were snatched away by their relatives. All that was left was an empty shelf. Yesterday, when the original owner of this body met with that incident, the only old servant left was also driven out and left to wander the streets. When Ning Xuemo came back, she accidentally bumped into him and picked him up. In that farce, his foot was stepped on and injured. At this moment, he was using one leg to wipe the table and stool. He was busy like a spinning top, and his mouth was also chattering endlessly. It was nothing more than thanking the heavens for opening their eyes and clearing their young misgrievances. Ning Xuemo knew that the original owner and this old servant had always depended on each other for survival. Their relationship was like that of a father and daughter. This old servant was also the only person who was good to the original owner. At this moment, hearing him chatter endlessly, she did not become impatient and let him speak. While they were talking, Ji Yunhao's imperial bodyguard brought in another 2,000 taels of gold. When the chest was opened, the glittering and glistening gold ingots neatly stacked together made the old servant's eyes almost pop out of their sockets. He had never seen so much gold before. That imperial bodyguard bowed to Ning Xuemo. "Miss Ning, this is my family's prince's gift to you. The total is 2,000 taels, please accept it." Ning Xuemo was drinking the inferior tea the old servant brewed. Hearing this, she raised her head. "Didn't we agree on 1,000 taels?" That imperial bodyguard proudly said, "My family's prince took pity on Miss Ning's family for being poor, so he specially doubled the amount." He looked at Ning Xuemo with a face like he was showing kindness to a beggar. That old servant's complexion changed. A scholar can be killed, but not humiliated. His young miss was the young miss of Marquis Jing Yuan's household. She was born with a lofty and unyielding character. She would rather die than accept this kind of handout food. He opened his mouth and was about to righteously reprimand that imperial bodyguard and have him take the extra 1,000 taels back. Who would have thought that Ning Xuemo would blow at the tea foam and say with a smile, "Then Xuemo would like to thank your prince." He casually picked up an ingot of gold and weighed it in his palm before tossing it to the old servant. "Old Zhong, this is for you to buy wine." The old servant could only accept it. Her reaction stunned the guard. He felt as if he had punched a pile of cotton, an indescribable emptiness. But he couldn't say anything else, so he could only leave dejectedly. Old Zhong looked at Ning Xuemo with a complicated expression. "Miss," Ning Xuemo waved her hand. "Old Zhong, I know what you want to say." "You don't have to say anything. I know what I'm doing." She stood up and walked around the box full of gold. Her eyes sparkled. "This lady is short on money. It's rare for a spendthrift to give me more. It's a waste not to accept it." She paced around the hall 2 steps. "Old Zhong, you're already old, so there are some things you can't do anymore. Go and put up another notice. Just say that the Marquis Jing Yuan's household is recruiting servants. Those who are quick on their feet and loyal to their master will be given priority. The monthly salary will be 3 taels of silver and the best will be accepted." Old Zhong was shocked. "Miss, the servant's monthly salary is 1 tael of silver. Isn't this price too high?" Ning Xuemo said, "Only with a large amount of money can we recruit high-quality talents. Just do as I say. I want to recruit 2 top-level chefs, for maids to take care of my daily needs, for manservants to clean the courtyard, and 8 guards with 3rd-level psyche power. The chefs will receive 5 taels of silver a month, the maids and manservants will receive 3 taels of silver a month, and the guards will receive 10 taels of silver a month." The conditions that she listed out were all twice as high as the price outside. It was very tempting. Chapter 17. Her eyes flashed. She wanted to let Marquis Jing Yuan's mansion regain its dignity. She wanted to make the people in the capital not dare to look down on her. Although she always had a smile on her face, she had the demeanor of a superior, making people not dare to refute her and only want to submit to her. This was the first time old Zhong saw such a confident Mississippi. Sensing her mood, he also felt his blood boil. "Yes, Mississippi. This old servant will do it." Then he straightened his back and left. "Hey, what are you guys talking about?" The chastity testing beast was finally unhappy after being ignored for so long. Ning Xuemo went to the front of the iron cage and replied in English, "It's nothing, I just told you something." Speaking of which, my eastern courtyard is not bad. You can stay there. The chastity testing beast shook the iron cage with dissatisfaction. That's fine. First, open this thing for me. Don't lock me up. Ning Shuama shook her head. Your iron cage has a charm, I can't open it. Unless you come out of the small door. The chastity testing beast rolled its eyes. This small hole is so small. How can I come out? Ning Shuama spread out her hands. Then I can't do anything. You should obediently stay in the iron cage. Later, if there is a way, I will let you out. Even if she could pry open the iron cage, she couldn't do it. After all, it was now a beast with a bloodthirsty nature. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many girls who died under its claws. If she let it go, in case it suddenly turned into a beast, she would be in trouble. The chastity testing beast was dissatisfied. Then how do you want me to go to the east courtyard? Ning Shuama sized up its stature and tried to negotiate with it. How about you carry this iron cage yourself? You are so big and also a mythological beast. You should have the strength, right? Chastity testing beast. One person and one beast were talking here. Suddenly, a faint noise came from the front yard, followed by rapid footsteps that went straight to the hall. Second Aunt Ning, you can't force your way in. My Mrs. Body is not good, she can't see guests. Old Zhong's voice was somewhat breathless. After all, one of his legs was injured, so he couldn't catch up with other people's footsteps. What are you talking about? How could entering his own niece's courtyard be considered trespassing? Can't I come to see my niece? As he spoke, a woman in her 30s rushed in like a gust of wind. Shuama, Auntie is here to see you. The woman thoughtfully shook the 2 packets of snacks in her hands, but her sharp eyes greedily fell on the open box of ingots. In 3 steps he scurried over. Yo, eldest niece, where did you get so much gold? Don't tell me it's fake. He stretched out his hand to grab it. Paw! The lid of the box suddenly closed like lightning, almost catching the woman's hand. The woman unwillingly raised her head and saw Ning Shuama sitting leisurely on the lid of the box. Ning Shuama looked at her with a faint smile. Second madam, are you here to take advantage of me again? This second madam was the wife of the original owner's distant uncle. Marquis Jingyuan was born poor. His parents died early, so when he was young, he wandered the streets. None of his poor relatives were willing to help him. Later on, he made a name for himself and was appointed a general. All of his relatives, who were once 8 poles away from him, all came knocking on his door to acknowledge him as their relative. They considered themselves to be the general's relatives, and from time to time, they would come to Marquis Jingyuan's mansion to take advantage of him and ask for things. Marquis Jingyuan remembered that they were from the same sect, so he didn't care about old grudges and helped them. But he didn't expect that although they were grateful on the surface, their bones were full of jealousy. Chapter 18. After Marquis Jingyuan and his wife died, not only did they not remember the general's kindness, they even added insult to injury. They looked for all kinds of reasons to come to the Marquis mansion and sweep everything clean. The original Ning Shuama was only a child. When she was bullied by them, no one stood up for her. She always feared and hated these people, but she had no way to stop their evil deeds. Among the relatives who came to steal things, this second madam was the most overbearing. There was one time when Ning Shuama slightly blocked her and was angrily slapped by this distant aunt. Her cheeks were red and swollen for several days, because the Marquis mansion had been too poor for the past year. Even the flowers in the garden had been almost all picked by them, so she didn't come as often. It had already been half a year since she last visited. She didn't expect that she would come at this time. When Ning Shuama was trapped in the iron cage, she didn't see these relatives come out. Each and every one of them wished they could hide at the ends of the earth. Now, they probably heard that she had obtained 1,000 taels of gold, so they were like flies that smelled a stench, arrogantly flying over. It was obvious that they had ideas about the gold. Ning Xuemo saw through her intentions, making the second madam unable to keep her face. Her face sank. Xuemo, how can you say that? Aunt heard that you were wronged, so I quickly came to see you. My good intentions were treated as ill intent by you. Ning Xuemo sneered, Second madam, every time you come to see me with good intentions, you always take a fancy to something and impolitely take it to your home. Last time, you even took away an armchair. It must be hard for someone as thin and withered as you to not be crushed by the armchair. This kind of sarcasm was really sharp. The second madam's thin face flushed red and her eyebrows raised. Girl, is this the attitude you speak to your elders? You're so undisciplined and out of control. Sure enough, your parents died early and you don't have any upbringing. This old lady will discipline you in place of your parents. I'll let you know when to advance and when to retreat. Her figure rose and she threw herself at Ning Xuemo. She had a level 2 psychokinesis and knew some martial arts. Even a few strong men were no match for her. In addition, she gave birth to a daughter with a Xiantian 3rd level psychokinesis, and her daughter was accepted as an outer disciple of the world's 3rd largest sect, the Storm Sect. She was even more insufferably arrogant, and could do whatever she wanted in the clan. He was used to bullying Ning Xuemo. She would reach out and hit Ning Xuemo whenever there was a disagreement. She would often beat Ning Xuemo until her face was black and blue, but no one cared about her. Therefore, this time, when Ning Xuemo refuted her, she immediately showed her shrewish side. She raised her palms and struck. He wanted to beat this stinky girl up, snatch the golden box, and leave. 2,000 taels of gold was less than 200 caddies, so she could carry it. She had to quickly snatch the gold and leave. Otherwise, when the other relatives heard the news and came running over, she would not be able to get the exclusive share. Because of this thought, her 2 palms were exceptionally ferocious and she used almost all of her strength. If Ning Xuemo was hit by her, she would immediately be sent flying. Even if she didn't die, she would lose half of her life. This woman, for this little bit of gold, she was actually so ruthless. The old servant, Uncle Zhong, cried out in alarm. He wanted to help, but his legs were not nimble and he was too late. Clap! Clap! A clear and loud clap sounded. A figure flew out and hit the pillar at the side with a bang. She cried out in pain and fell to the ground and rolled. Old Zhong trembled with fear and couldn't help but open his eyes wide. The one who flew out was not his young miss, but the second madam. Chapter 19. Her hair was scattered, her forehead was bruised, and there were 2 clear palm prints on her face. Her head was dizzy as she crawled up from the ground. Her eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. You stinky girl, what kind of witchcraft did you use? Ning Xuemo leisurely took a handkerchief from the side and wiped her hands. After wiping her hands, she casually threw the handkerchief at her face and replied with a smile, Guess. Second madam. Her face was burning and 2 of her teeth were knocked out. Her mouth was full of bloody foam. When she heard Ning Xuemo's words, her face immediately turned ashen. She fiercely glared at Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo crossed her legs and sat on top of the gold ingot chest. She crooked her finger at second madam. Do you want to teach your niece a lesson again? Her hands were itching. Although her small body was a bit weak, her hands and feet could still be considered nimble. She also had a body full of exquisite close combat skills and was best at borrowing strength to fight strength. Not to mention this vulgar second madam, even if a lion pounced over, she could use her strength to send it flying. Second madam was naturally unwilling to suffer such a big loss. She felt that it was a coincidence that she was sent flying. At that time, she faintly felt that she tripped over something. It must have been her own misstep. She definitely couldn't let this little girl destroy her prestige. She pounced over like a vicious wolf again. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, second madam had experienced all kinds of falls and bruises. Finally, her arrogance dissipated and she lay on the ground, unable to get up. She loudly cried, "Io, you want to beat someone to death. Your niece wants to beat my own aunt to death." Her voice was sharp like a wolf's howl. She was the standard shrew. That voice directly traveled out of the manor. Ning Xuemo really laughed this time. This kind of shrew reminded her of Lu Xun's tofu beauty. She was sharp and unkind, and if she didn't take advantage of her, it would be like suffering a loss. She was as thin as a compass with slender feet, but her lung capacity was still quite astonishing. Her voice was loud and sonorous. Ning Xuemo knew that the relatives of this body were on their way to the Marquis of Jingyuan's estate. With second madam howling like this, it would definitely attract them to come and seek justice. Then she might as well deal with them all together. It would save him trouble in the future. She sat on the lid of the box and gestured to old Zhong, "Serve the tea." The second madam thought that she was finally afraid and howled even louder, "Now you want to offer tea as an apology? No way. You've committed such a heinous act against your superiors, and you want to send me off with a cup of tea?" Ning Xuemo took the tea from old Zhong. She brushed the foam off with the cup lid and smiled casually. "Who's going to give you tea? Are you worthy? You can howl even louder. If you make the lady happy, she will reward you." Second madam. She was so angry that she started to tremble. Sitting there and howling was not right, but not howling was not right either. After thinking about it, he decided to howl. She wailed again. Ning Xuemo pretended not to hear her and sipped her tea slowly. Occasionally, he would ask, "Are you thirsty? Do you want a cup of tea?" At first, second madam's face was still full of chastity, and she repeatedly said that she didn't want to drink. Later, she cried until her throat was almost smoking. When Ning Xuemo asked her again, she subconsciously went to take it. Unexpectedly, Ning Xuemo raised her hand and splashed a cup of hot tea onto second madam's face. Second madam's face was bruised and swollen. When the cup of hot tea hit her face, it was no different from being splashed with boiling oil. She cried out and jumped up from the ground. Chapter 20. What's going on? Why are you wailing like a ghost and howling like a wolf? A dignified voice came from outside the hall. 6 people aggressively barged in. Ning Xuemo's long eyelashes fluttered. Very good. Second uncle, eldest uncle, first aunt, fifth cousin, sixth cousin, and eldest cousin are all here. They're all here. Second madam pounced on her husband with a face full of tea foam. "Husband, you have to get justice for me. I'm going to be bullied to death by this little bitch." Second uncle probably didn't expect his wife to be in such a sorry state. He was stunned. What's going on? Second madam slapped her thigh and cried loudly. She recounted the scene with exaggerated details. Of course, she didn't say that she had pounced on the chest of gold. In the end, she rolled on the ground and cried out in pain. One moment, she said that her leg was broken, the next moment, she said that her arm was broken, and her waist was twisted. She couldn't move anymore. She looked as if she had been beaten to the point where she couldn't get up. Second uncle's face was so gloomy that it looked like it was about to rain. "Ning Xuemo, how can you be so vicious? Your second aunt came to visit you out of the kindness of her heart, but you treated her so cruelly. What are your intentions? If you don't give us an explanation, we won't let this matter rest." The others also chimed in. That's right, that's right. We're still considered your relatives. We usually take good care of you, but you repay our kindness with enmity. It really hurts. We can't let this matter rest. You injured your second aunt and committed the crime of offending your superior. If you don't give us an explanation, we'll send you to the officials and let you have a taste of prison. Everyone was talking at once, trying to scare and threaten her. However, from time to time, their eyes would drift over to the chest of gold. They couldn't wait to take the gold out of it. Ning Xuemo listened without saying a word. When they all shut up, she blinked her eyes. Then what do you want? Her voice was soft and tender. Everyone thought that this little child was finally scared, so they tried to scare her a little more. The second uncle was even more pleased with himself. He finally opened his mouth and stated his purpose. You beat your second aunt up like this. It can be said that your crime is unforgivable. However, considering that you are still a child, as your elders, we can't be too calculative with you. However, your second aunt's injuries need to be treated properly. She can't move now and needs someone to serve her. She also needs money. You should compensate your second aunt with 1,000 taels of gold. Ning Xuemo didn't say anything, but the others couldn't stand it. It was rumored that Ning Xuemo had received 1,000 taels of gold. If they were to compensate second brother's family, then what would they get? Second brother, that's where you're wrong. Sister-in-law's injuries are just superficial wounds. She'll be fine after getting some medicine. Why would she need 1,000 taels of gold? Aren't you exaggerating a little too much? The aunt retorted. That's right. If you ask me, 100 taels of gold will be enough at most. In addition to the loss of time, let Xuemo compensate you with 200 taels of gold. The first uncle said. A man whose heart is never content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Second uncle, you're really asking for too much. The fifth cousin said righteously. The second aunt was anxious and slapped her thigh. Why are you acting as righteous envoys? You're not the one who got hurt. Do you think I don't know what you're planning? You just want to get a share of the profits. You want this batch of gold. Ni Xuemo is still young. It's not safe for this 1,000 taels of gold to be in her hands. We just want to keep it for her. Moreover, since she got this windfall, she should share it with the other relatives in the family. Chapter 21. Several people were quarreling over the ownership of this batch of gold, their faces red with anger. Ning Xuemo looked at them with cold eyes, but the corners of her mouth always had a trace of a smile. The group of people quarreled for a long time, but no one gave in. The more they quarreled, the angrier they became. Shut up! Shut up! The chastity-testing beast, who had been watching from the side, couldn't bear it anymore and roared. Granny, they were all arguing in Chinese. That girl didn't translate for it. It was like a duck listening to thunder. It didn't understand a bit. Instead, its head hurt from the noise. Its voice was like a thunderclap in the hole. Everyone trembled and couldn't help but shut their mouths. After all, the chastity-testing beast was a mythological beast. Once it was angry, its momentum was absolutely amazing. It shook the iron cage in front of it and roared a few times at the group of people, causing their ears to go numb and their vision to turn black. They were scared out of their wits by its terrifying momentum. Ning Xuemo picked her ears and walked to the front of the iron cage. She patted its paw and comforted it in Chinese. You said you hate people making noise the most. You want to tear the people who make noise to pieces and eat them. The chastity-testing beast didn't understand what she was saying, but when it heard her gentle voice, it thought she was comforting it. So, it nodded its head majestically. When it nodded its head, it almost scared the group of people. They shrank their bodies one after another. Ning Xuemo sighed, then, I'll open the cage for you. I just happen to know how to break the curse. She pretended to chant the curse. The group of people panicked and tried to stop her. Ni Xuemo, you can't open the cage. You can't let it hurt people. Okay, let's not quarrel. Come, let's discuss the ownership of the gold. First uncle's voice lowered. The group of people gathered together and wanted to calmly discuss the result that everyone was satisfied with. After a round of intense bargaining, they finally came to an agreement. The gold would be divided into 5 portions. Second aunt would get an extra portion due to her injury, and the rest would be divided equally. By the time they came up with the proposal, it was already 4 hours later. During this time, Ning Xuemo drank 2 pots of tea and swallowed 3 plates of pastries. Seeing that they were rushing directly to the golden box, she slowly opened her mouth and said, "Have you guys had enough? If you're done, you can scram now." Everyone, eldest uncle's face darkened. "Xuemo, what are you saying? Everyone here is your elder." Ning Xuemo brushed her hair and sneered, "Elder? With just you guys?" None of them remembered the kindness of the Marquis when he was alive, and desperately bullied his only weak daughter, and looted the things of the Marquis of Jingyuan's estate. Was this the behavior of an elder? Don't tarnish the word elder. His words made everyone's faces turn red. Second uncle said confidently, "It's an indisputable fact that you injured your second aunt. You have to compensate her." Ning Xuemo sneered, "This is Marquis Jingyuan's estate. She came uninvited." A commoner barged into Marquis Jingyuan's estate, bullied the youngest daughter of the Marquis, and stole the gold gifted by the 6th prince. What kind of crime is this? It's already very lucky that she didn't get beaten to death, and she still wants to be greedy and ask for compensation. Where's her face? Her pretty face darkened, and a cold murderous aura loomed around her body. Her aura completely changed. That kind of pressure made everyone's heart turn cold, and they all choked there, unable to speak for a while. Chapter 22. The uncle struggled to say a few words. "Xuemo, you're wrong. Even if you don't compensate your second aunt, you won't be able to spend the 1,000 taels of gold. You should help your clansmen. You know, every family has its own difficulties. We are also short of money." Ning Xuemo smiled. Her smile was full of sarcasm. She opened the gold chest and picked up an ingot of gold. She weighed it in her hand. "You're short of money, so I, an orphan, should give you gold for free. What kind of fallacy is this? This gold is mine. Even if I throw it to the dogs, it's not up to you to speak." She casually threw it into the chastity-testing beast's iron cage. The chastity-testing beast looked at the gold ingot rolling around under its feet. Its pair of big eyes flashed with question marks. It naturally recognized gold, but it didn't understand Ning Xuemo's intention. It used its big claws to push the gold ingot and pressed it under its palm. Everyone. Ning Xuemo's palm was like a fairy scattering flowers. She threw the ingot of gold into the iron cage. When everyone reacted, she had already thrown half of the chest of gold into the iron cage. Those who knew martial arts rushed over. "Stop! Stop! What are you doing?" Countless hands stretched out, wanting to snatch the gold from the chest. Ning Xuemo's eyes flashed with a cold light. She kicked the chest and closed it with a snap, pinching the fingers of the fingers. While people were screaming, Ning Xuemo's figure spun around. Almost no one could see her movements clearly. They only saw that she had already picked up the gold chest, and with a turn, she broke free from the encirclement of the crowd. When everyone reacted, the chest of gold had already fallen into the iron cage. The iron cage was tall, but the cage door was small. It could only allow one person to enter and exit. The chest of gold glittered in the cage door. Ning Xuema said a few words to the chastity-testing beast. Then she turned around. If you really want the gold, you can go into the cage and take it. I will give you as much as you take. Everyone looked at the majestic chastity-testing beast in the iron cage. Who would dare to make a move? But seeing the gold in front of him, he was unwilling to let it go just like that. He was stunned for a moment. Ning Xuema crossed her arms and coldly said, I'll count to 10. If you don't dare to go in and take it, then obediently roll out of Marquis Jingyuan's estate for me. 1. The hall was filled with the crisp sound of her counting. Every single count was exceptionally clear. Everyone was at a loss for words. The eldest uncle was gloomy. He glanced at Ning Xuema and suddenly had an idea. Wouldn't it be best if he subdued this girl and let her go into the cage to get it herself? Without batting an eyelid, he took a step closer to Ning Xuema and was about to launch a sudden attack. The sound of orderly footsteps came from outside. Soon after, the hall door darkened and 8 vigorous youths walked in. Each of them walked with light steps and swift movements. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of Ning Xuema and bowed together, young master. Second Ant's group of people stared blankly for a moment before old Zhong quickly entered. He bowed and reported to Ning Xuema, young master, they are the guards that this old servant recruited. Each one of them has a psychokinesis of at least rank 2 and is a true martial artist. They are willing to follow young master and protect young master. It turned out that when those people were making a ruckus, old Zhong received Ning Xuema's instructions and quietly went out to recruit people. Generous rewards would attract brave men. Marquis Jingyuan's estate also offered a high price. Once the recruitment notice was posted, people came to apply like a flock of ducks. Chapter 23. Although old Zhong was old, his ability to judge people was very good. He carefully selected 8 guards and brought them back first. The 8 of them were full of vigor. Just standing there, they were exceptionally imposing. Second Ant's group couldn't help but shrink their necks and involuntarily beat a retreat. At this time, Ning Xuema had already counted to 3. She let old Zhong continue to count and opened her mouth to tell the 8 guards the conditions. She simply stated 2 points. First, they would all receive 10 taels of silver each month. If they did well, she would give them additional rewards. Second, these people had to fulfill their duties. Without her permission, they were not allowed to let anyone into the Marquis mansion. If anyone trespassed, they would be deducted 2 taels of silver each. She was very clear about rewards and punishments. The 8 people agreed in unison. The 8 people's voices were loud and clear, shaking the roof tiles and making Second Ant's group tremble again. They looked at Ning Xuema with a complicated gaze. They didn't expect that Ning Xuema, who used to be so weak that they could bully and pinch her, would become so strong after such a big change. It was as if she had changed into a different person. In the future, if they came to the Marquis mansion to take advantage of her, they were afraid that there would be no way out, but they were not willing to leave with their tails between their legs. Old Zhong had already counted to 6. Ning Xuema smiled and looked around at everyone. What? No one dares to take it. I gave you a chance, but you didn't want it. Her clear voice echoed in the hall, and everyone else held their breaths. The atmosphere was abnormally tense. No one noticed that on the roof of the hall, there was a man dressed in black who was leaning over and quietly watching for who knows how long. The roof tiles in front of him were faintly transparent, allowing him to see the scene in the room. He was the 6th Prince Ji Yunhao's personal shadow guard. His martial arts were top-notch and he was ordered to investigate the situation of this marquis young Mississippi Ji Yunhao had made such a big fool of himself in public. In the end, his heart was still unreconciled. He knew that Ning Xuema's relatives were not easy to deal with. He deliberately gave Ning Xuema the gold with great fanfare. In fact, it was also a kind of scheme to kill someone with a borrowed knife. Therefore, he sent this personal shadow guard to see what would happen next. The shadow guard looked indifferent at first, but after a while, he became focused. Every action of the girl in the house was beyond his expectations. Not only did she know the language of the beasts, she also knew a type of martial arts that he had never seen before. She was also very clever, and the way she handled things was even more shrewd and ruthless than an adult. Those who said that this girl was trash were simply blind. If the sixth prince really lost her, it would be an unprecedented loss. His gaze couldn't help but be attracted to Ning Xuema. He focused all his energy on her and was engrossed in watching. Suddenly, someone knocked on his shoulder, and a voice came from behind him. "Is it nice?" That shadow guard almost jumped up. He hurriedly turned around. The moonlight was bright, and the roof tiles were like frost. Behind him stood a young man in a moon-colored robe. His hair was as black as ink, and his eyes were like the ripples of autumn water. His lips were like a light red peony. He stood under the moonlight, and the beautiful jade on his waist was glowing. On his thumb was a large jade ring, and on his palm was a white jade flute. His eyebrows and eyes were full of elegance. He looked gentle and refined, but there was a noble aura hidden in his bones. That shadow guard almost trembled. "Your Highness the Crown Prince." Ji Yunhuang, the Crown Prince of Chongkong Country, was also a legend. In the Tian-Ci continent, there were two types of martial arts. One was ordinary martial arts. People with psychokinesis at the first or second level would cultivate this. Chapter 24. The first type was ordinary martial arts. People with psychokinesis at the first or second level would cultivate this. At the highest level, they could become a martial arts expert and become a warrior, a bodyguard, or a bodyguard. The majority of people in Tian-Ci continent were like this. The last type was techniques. People with psychokinesis at the third level and above would cultivate this. This type of cultivator had the most room for development and was also the most complicated. They were divided into three types: heaven, earth, and human. Each type was also divided into 10 levels. For those who could cultivate techniques, most of them would cultivate to the 10th level in their entire life and would not be able to advance any further. Very few people could break through the human level and enter the earth level, becoming a genius among geniuses. These people were very few in number and all of them were great masters of their generation. Every action of theirs would determine the rise and fall of a sect. As for the heaventh level, it was a legendary level. It was rumored that the ancestor had already cultivated to this level. However, none of the living people in Tian-Ci continent had ever seen him in action. Or perhaps, those who had seen him in action had already disappeared from this continent. Psychokinesis was divided into 10 levels. The higher the level of techniques one could cultivate and the more effective they would be. Most of the people in Tian-Ci continent were at the first or second level. Only a small number of people had reached the third or fourth level. Those who reached the fifth level were extremely rare and were fought over by various sections. As for this Crown Prince Ji Yunhuang, his psychokinesis was at the sixth level. At a young age, he had already cultivated to the third level of the Earth realm and became the pride of Chongkong Country. Not long after his talent was tested, the old emperor announced to the world that he was the Crown Prince. At a young age, he was taken in by the head disciple of the world's #1 mysterious sect, the Sun Moon sect. He became the ancestor's direct disciple and was carefully nurtured. Although he was the crown prince, he was not in the palace often. Most of his time was spent cultivating in the Sun-Moon sect. However, he had eyes and ears everywhere. Everything that happened in Chongkong country could not escape his eyes and ears. Intelligence, courage, decisiveness, scheming, he was the best in all of them. He had many brothers and many capable people, but none of them dared to covet his position as the crown prince. His position as the crown prince was even more secure than iron. The Shadow Guard did not expect that this legendary crown prince would actually appear here. He subconsciously wanted to bow down to this future monarch. Ji Yunhuang raised his flute, and the Shadow Guard's knees were supported by an invisible stream of air, making him unable to kneel. Since you have already let go, why linger? Tell my sixth brother not to disgrace the imperial family. Ji Yunhuang's voice was indifferent, but there was no room for doubt. Yes. The Shadow Guard hurriedly replied, bowed, and flew away. The two of them were speaking via voice transmission, so outsiders couldn't hear them at all. Therefore, no one in the hall was alarmed. Ji Yunhuang pointed his flute at the roof tile that had returned to its normal color. The roof tile instantly turned into a mirror, and the scene in the hall was reflected in his eyes. Ha! That second ant rolled on the ground, covered in blood. She was like a fish that had come ashore, and she was in so much pain that she kept jumping. It turned out that she was not willing to return empty-handed. She also saw the golden chest placed at the entrance of the iron cage. The golden light directly attracted her soul. Taking advantage of the chastity testing beast turning around, she rushed forward and reached out her hand to grab the gold. She felt that her speed was fast enough, but she didn't expect the chastity testing beast to be even faster than her. Her vision blurred, and her good arm was already torn off by the chastity testing beast. Chapter 25. Fortunately, her husband saw that the situation was not good and rushed forward to hug her. She was not dragged into the iron cage and torn to shreds, saving her life. This scene was too tragic, and almost everyone was shocked. Even the 8 newly recruited guards were so shocked that they broke out in cold sweat. These people were newly recruited, and they were not loyal to Ning Xuemo. It was inevitable that 1 or 2 of them would have designs on this batch of gold. But after seeing this scene, their hearts were filled with anxiety, and they completely dispelled the bad thoughts. Ji Yunhuang's expression also changed slightly. This little girl was quite scheming, and this plan of killing the chicken to scare the monkey was ingenious. He was just bored and came to take a look, but he did not expect to see such an interesting scene. This trip was really not in vain. This little girl let him see a good show. What he did not expect was that there would be an even more exciting show behind. The second uncle still had not recovered from the shock, and just as he was about to get angry at Ning Xuemo hugged her arm and asked, "Do you want her arm to grow back?" Everyone was stunned. An arm could be grown back after being cut off. What kind of joke was this? Even the best doctor in the world would not be able to do this. The second uncle angrily rebuked, "Ning Xuemo, even now you still want to make fun of us. Who has the ability to reattach a severed arm?" Ning Xuemo pointed at herself with her small hand and directly replied with one word, "Me." Everyone looked at her in bewilderment, as if they were looking at a little monster. Ning Xuemo glanced at the second ant who was rolling on the ground, and the corner of her mouth slightly hooked up. "I can reattach her severed arm within 2 hours. Of course, if you don't believe me, you can directly carry her away. So that she doesn't pollute my family's land." The second ant who had lost an arm had already lost all hope. Although she did not believe Ji Yunchu's words, it was still a glimmer of hope, so how could she let it go? She repeatedly said, "I believe you. I believe you. Quickly cast the spell. Ning Xuemo said, It's easy for me to save you, but you have to agree to one of my conditions. What condition? Return all the things that have been stolen from Marquis Jingyuan's estate over the years. Not a single item can be missing. Ning Xuemo stated her conditions. Second uncle stared blankly. These past few years, the things they had taken from Marquis Jingyuan's estate were worth at least 2,000 taels of gold. If they were to spit it all out, it would be even more unbearable than killing him. Second uncle still wanted to negotiate, but Ning Xuemo stopped him directly. I'll only give you half a cup of tea's time to think about it. After this time, even if you give me all your family property, I can't do anything about it. Second uncle and second aunt were both stingy people. They were the kind of people who would suffer losses if they didn't take advantage of others. After a fierce struggle, second uncle actually chose to give up on the treatment. There's no such thing as a broken arm being reattached in this world. You must be playing tricks again. I don't believe it. Wife, let's go. If I can't fix it for her, not only will I not ask for a refund, I will also give you the 2,000 taels of gold. Ning Xuemo said. This condition was really tempting, but second uncle still did not believe it. You little girl, you're trying to coax me again. When the time comes and you can't reattach the arm, what will I do if you don't give me the gold? This consort can be a witness. Suddenly, a clear and resonant magnetic voice came from the roof. Following the voice, a man floated out. This person stood with his back to the light, and the candlelight gently outlined his figure. He was tall, straight, and handsome. Everyone's eyes lit up. It was as if a hall full of lights could not compare to his radiance. What was even rarer was his imposing manner. It was as light as the wind, but it also made people's hearts turn cold, not daring to look directly at him. Chapter 26. Most of the people in the hall were commoners. How could they have the chance to see the godlike crown prince? They were stunned for a moment. Old Zhong's face was filled with shock and disbelief as he hurriedly bowed down. Welcome, Your Highness. A sudden clap of thunder. Everyone was dumbfounded. Even Ning Xuemo was stunned. Crown Prince. Putong. Putong. Everyone in the hall knelt down in fear and trepidation. Greetings, Your Highness. Ning Xuemo was speechless. She naturally knew who this crown prince was, but she did not understand why this incomparably noble crown prince would come to her roof to eavesdrop. Speaking of which, how long had he been eavesdropping? Of course, she could not ask this question. After all, the other party was extremely powerful. With her small arms, it was better not to twist his thigh. With this honorable crown prince as a witness, how could second uncle dare to say anything else? He could only sign a contract with Ning Xuemo. Although there were all kinds of things that second uncle's family had taken away, old Zhong had memorized them one by one. Now, he had converted them into money. The total amount was 5,000 taels of silver. No one dared to play tricks in front of the crown prince. Even if second uncle wanted to renege on the debt, he did not dare to do so now. In his heart, he only hoped that Ning Xuemo would lose. Crown Prince Ji Yunhuang's bright moon-like eyes landed on Ning Xuemo. Miss Xuemo, with this prince as a witness, you can start the treatment. This continent was not peaceful. Martial arts were respected, and there were fights every day. The number of injured people was uncountable. Therefore, the status of doctors was very high. Although there were many doctors in this world, those who could reach the standard of a national healer were pitifully few. They were as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. Most of them were recruited by various large sections. Even the imperial palace was in short supply of good doctors. They were treated like state teachers. Because of Ji Yunhuang's status, he knew many doctors, and many of them were top-notch. However, even the best doctors could not reconnect the limbs of a broken limb. Therefore, when Ning Xuemo said this, Ji Yunhuang was also shocked. He was afraid that his second uncle would not accept Ning Xuemo's conditions because of the money, so he immediately showed himself. With the Crown Prince's personal orders, all the preparations were completed in a very short time. Ji Yunhuang even followed Ning Xuemo's request and used a spell to clean the room thoroughly. Although it could not be compared to modern sterile operating rooms, it was still acceptable. "Your Highness, please wait in the main hall." Ning Xuemo bowed to him and rudely chased him away. Ji Yunhuang originally wanted to watch her do it with his own eyes, but Ning Xuemo's words dispelled his thoughts. When Xuemo performs the rescue, she needs to be completely naked. Ji Yunhuang turned around and walked out. "I will wait in the main hall." He had no interest in looking at the middle-aged woman's naked body. Second aunt had been knocked unconscious by Ji Yunhuang using a special method. If her acupoints were not unsealed, she would definitely not wake up. Therefore, Ning Xuemo was at ease as she cut the needle and thread on second aunt's body. She was not afraid that she would jump up in pain. A quarter of an hour passed, then a quarter of an hour passed. Half an hour passed. The room was still quiet, except for the occasional sound of a knife and scissors being cut into a disc. Everyone held their breaths and waited in the main hall. Of course, with the Crown Prince present, the others only dared to stand with their hands down. Old Zhong fearfully brought out a brand new tea set to serve tea. Ji Yunhuang glanced at it and lightly said, "Put it down." Chapter 27. Old Zhong respectfully brought out a brand new tea set to serve tea. Ji Yunhuang glanced at it and said faintly, "Put it down." He was a perfectionist. Everything had to be the best. This tea smelled far worse than the tea he usually drank, and he found it hard to swallow. Old Zhong did not dare to say anything else and served a few more refreshments, but Ji Yunhuang did not touch them. It was already past dinner time, and everyone was hungry. However, since the Crown Prince did not have any intention of eating, they naturally did not dare to mention it. Soon, 2 hours were about to pass. Second uncle secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to say that it was time, the door opened and Ning Xuemo walked out. "It's done, it's connected." In her previous life, not only did she learn Chinese medicine, she also learned surgery from an international top medical genius. Being a special agent was a dangerous profession. She and her subordinates often got injured, but as long as she was by their side, they would be treated in time. Not to mention that she could reattach an arm, even if there was a hole in the heart, she could heal it as long as the emergency treatment was in time. The equipment of this era naturally could not be compared to the modern professional equipment, but fortunately, her medical skills were superb, and she was able to reattach second aunt's arm properly. She also used a special method to slightly dredge second aunt's blood vessels. When everyone rushed in to check second aunt's injury, her broken fingers were already trembling unconsciously. Miracle. This was simply a miracle. Where did she learn such medical skills from? Ji Yunhuang looked at Ning Xuemo with an inquisitive gaze. Second uncle regretted it and wanted to think of a way to renege. How can this be considered reattached? At most, you can just sew her arm back. She definitely won't be able to move her arm, and her palm won't be able to grasp anything. Ji Yunhuang's lips curled up slightly. Whether she can grasp something or not, we'll know once we try. He opened his palm and a gold ingot appeared in his palm. He casually stuffed it into second aunt's injured hand and slowly said, "If you can grasp it, this gold ingot is yours." Although second aunt was unconscious, her greedy nature had already seeped into her bones. The moment her palm touched the gold ingot, she trembled slightly and immediately clenched her 5 fingers tightly, nimbly grasping the gold ingot in her hand. Second uncle was speechless. Ji Yunhuang flicked his finger and second aunt woke up from her coma. Her physical strength was really good. As soon as she woke up, she didn't care that her arm was bandaged like a dumpling. She immediately raised her hand to look at the gold in her palm. Second uncle originally wanted to say that she might not be able to raise her arm, but he didn't expect his wife to do this. This made him choke on his words. In front of this crown prince, second uncle and his wife didn't dare to blatantly renege on the debt. However, when they thought about having to pay a few thousand taels of silver, they felt as if their flesh was being cut off while they were still alive. The second aunt decided to take another gamble. Shuama said that my arm would be as good as new, but I can barely hold something with my arm now. It hurts so much when I lift my arm a little. She can't completely cure my arm. Ning Shuama shot her a glance. Even if a dog's leg is broken, it would still need to be reattached for a period of time before it can recover to its original state. What's more, your arm fell off and was reattached. Rest well for a month. If you can't recover in a month, come and find me again. Injuries to the tendons and bones would take 100 days to recover. How could someone who had lost an arm recover in a month? Chapter 28. Not to mention second uncle and his wife, even Ji Yunhuang did not believe it. However, he had his own methods. With a snap of his fingers, an imperial bodyguard descended from the sky and knelt in front of him. Ji Yunhuang ordered, "Bring this woman to the Supreme Court. Have the bailiffs find a quiet room for her to recuperate for a month. After a month, bring her to see this prince." Second aunt was so frightened that her face changed. How could she enter the yamen as she pleased? If she went in, even if she did not die, she would lose a layer of skin. She loudly begged for mercy, saying that she did not want to go there and that she could go home to recuperate. Ji Yunhuang naturally did not agree. He was not interested in this woman's life or death. What he was most interested in was whether Ning Shuama's medical skills were as good as what she said. Thus, he waved his hand and second aunt was carried away without any explanation. The bailiffs in the Supreme Court were comparable to coroners. They were all astute and valiant. If second aunt wanted to cause trouble or harm herself, there was no way. He was very relieved. Since the crown prince had arranged it this way, those people naturally did not dare to say anything else. One by one, they left dejectedly. With the crown prince as her guarantor, Ning Shuama was not afraid that second uncle would cause trouble. She stretched out her small hand and yawned. This day had been really thrilling. It had been a day of ups and downs. Her small body could not take it anymore and was tired. Her actions were obviously to chase him away, but the crown prince pretended that he did not see it. He calmly chatted with Ning Shuama and asked her about her medical skills. Ning Shuama naturally would not foolishly say that she had transmigrated. Thus, she gave a very mysterious answer that no one could find any fault with. Heaven's gift. I accidentally learned it from a deity in a dream. Ji Yunhuang was speechless. Naturally, he didn't believe her nonsense, so he chatted with her for a while. Unfortunately, this little girl looked innocent and unaffected. Her eyes were as clear as crystal, but her words were watertight. No matter how he tried to pry, he couldn't find a single flaw in her story. Seeing that it was late at night, Ning Shuama could not help but ask, "Your Highness, it's already late. When will you return to the residence?" Ji Yunhuang suddenly raised his hand to ruffle her hair. "All right, I won't disturb you. This prince will go back now. I'll come back to see you in a few days." Then he left. Ning Shuama sat on the chair in a daze for a moment. She actually couldn't avoid the crown prince's palm. His movements didn't seem to be fast, but they were as smooth as flowing water. Before his palm reached her head, an inexplicable pressure had already reached her, causing her to be unable to move. Only then did he pat her head as if she was a little kid. This crown prince was indeed a genius among geniuses. Her martial arts were not on the same level as his. If he wanted to kill her, it would be as easy as blowing off dust. It seemed that she had to cultivate in seclusion. At the very least, she had to strengthen this little body of hers and restore the power she had in her previous life. She was sitting there with her head bowed as she planned for the future. The chastity-testing beast in the iron cage finally couldn't stand it anymore. It slammed the iron cage with a loud crash. "Woman, when are you going to prepare my food? Didn't you promise to prepare a table of good dishes and a jar of good wine for me? I'm hungry. I want to eat 10 roasted suckling pigs, 5 roasted whole lambs, and also 10 pounds of medium well steak." In one breath, it listed out many of its favorite dishes from its previous life. At the end, it didn't forget to add, "Don't give this lousy cow's head to eat. This lousy has eaten it for over 100 years. I've already eaten it until I vomited." Chapter 29. The chastity-testing beast's food was a kind of divine cow's head, and it was a freshly cut cow's head. For other chastity-testing beasts, it might be a delicious meal. But for him, who had transmigrated into a beast, every time he ate a meal, it would undoubtedly be a torture for him. Now, he was finally adopted by a little girl who understood his language. Later on, he would no longer have to suffer that kind of torture. Ning Xuema was very generous. She instructed old Zhong, and the newly hired chef was eager to show off his skills. Very quickly, he prepared a table of good dishes. Of course, the chastity-testing beast also ordered a lot of dishes. Ning Xuema didn't expect that the chastity-testing beast's sturdy and majestic body would actually get drunk with just a touch of wine. It only drank half a jar of green bamboo leaf, but it was already 70 to 80% drunk. The wine entered its intestines, and it howled English songs all night long. It was so noisy that everyone in the mansion was alarmed and unable to sleep. Ning Xuema let someone boil half a pot of hangover soup. After coaxing it to drink it, it finally calmed down. It lay there and muttered, crying and talking. It wept and complained about the grievances of transmigrating into a beast. It thought that after transmigrating, it would be like the male protagonists in other men's novels. It thought that it would be able to achieve earth-shattering things, and that it would be able to have countless beautiful women take the initiative to wrap themselves around it. It didn't expect that after being locked in an iron cage for 100 years, eating cow's head every day, not to mention beautiful women, it didn't even see half a female beast. Ning Xuema originally thought that being transmigrated while sleeping was already hard enough. After listening to the chastity-testing beast's tearful complaints, she felt satisfied. This beast was much more bitter than she was. The new servants of Marquis Jingyuan's mansion saw the following strange scene. Their young master got a blanket and sat in front of the iron cage. After chatting for a long time with the ferocious chastity-testing beast, their young master began to call the chastity-testing beast Tom. Everyone was surprised. Tom. Could it be that this chastity-testing beast was actually a female beast? This name was very strange. The chastity-testing beast's English name was Tom. After 100 years, someone finally called him by his original name. He was very moved, and his impression of Ning Xuema went up another level. Loyalty was refreshed. It was a very trustworthy beast. Since it had promised Ning Xuema that it would look after the gold, even if it was drunk, it wouldn't slack off. After drinking the hangover soup, it simply laid down on the chest that contained the gold and fell asleep. mansion of the sixth prince. The moonlight was perfect, and the flowers were beautiful. In the octagonal pavilion in the garden, Ji Yunhao sat on the main seat, surrounded by 3 beautiful women. These 3 beauties were all his concubines. They couldn't even be considered as side concubines. Your Highness, congratulations on finally canceling that marriage. Ning Xuema can't even compare to us. How could she be worthy of being your Highness's concubine? The beauty in pink said. That's right. Your Highness is wise to withdraw from this engagement. That trash isn't even qualified to be the prince's maid, not to mention anything else. Beauty Lulu continued. Here's to the prince finally getting rid of that trash. The beauty raised her wine cup. Ji Yunhao's gloomy face turned slightly better. They were right, trash was trash. Even if she occasionally showed off, it didn't change the fact that she was trash. He was now a favored prince in the royal family. His status would only become more and more honorable. Successfully withdrawing from this engagement was the right thing to do. He didn't do anything wrong. He raised his head and drank the wine, then looked up at the moonlight. That good-for-nothing girl must be under a lot of pressure from her so-called relatives, right? Chapter 30. Perhaps the 2,000 taels of gold had already been stolen by someone else and she had even been beaten up. The scene of Ning Xuema being beaten to the ground seemed to flash before his eyes. His heart felt a little better. He was the one who proposed breaking off the engagement and dumping her. At that time, she only did that to regain her face. Perhaps she was regretting it in her heart. He drank another cup of wine, completely unaware that his thoughts had revolved around that girl the entire night. Your Highness. The surroundings darkened and the shadow guard he sent silently appeared in front of him, kneeling on the ground. How is it? Ji Yunhao asked. He felt that this shadow guard should be able to bring back good news. That shadow guard looked at his 3 concubines and wanted to speak, but stopped. They are all on the same side, there is no harm in speaking. Ji Yunhao wanted to let these concubines hear how miserable that stinky girl was right now. His Highness's orders were greater than the heavens. That shadow guard paused for a moment before finally telling him everything that he saw in Marquis Jingyuan's mansion. His memory and ability to organize his words were very good, so he spoke very vividly. The more Ji Yunhao listened, the darker his face became. Without waiting for that shadow guard to finish, he slapped the table. You're saying that she knows martial arts? Her relatives couldn't do anything to her. Instead, they were fiercely taught a lesson by her. Yes. Miss Ning's martial arts are very strange, but it is very effective. This subordinate has never seen it before. Ji Yunhao's face was as calm as water. He also remembered the scene in the square where Ning Xuema had intentionally or unintentionally avoided his pressure point ceiling. Could it be that the girl's so-called trash physique was fake? Was she hiding it? It shouldn't be, right? The psychokinesis crystal ball had never made a mistake before. His heart was like a ball of fire. With a pop sound, his fingers directly crushed the wine cup. That shadow guard paused, as if he still had something to say. Ji Yunhao was impatient. What happened after that? Was there really no one who dared to reach out and steal the gold? The shadow guard lowered his head. This subordinate didn't see what happened after that, but His Highness the Crown Prince discovered this subordinate. Ji Yunhao's body stiffened, greatly surprised. My 3rd brother. He was also there. When did you go? The shadow guard was ashamed. This subordinate also did not know when His Highness the Crown Prince arrived. When this subordinate discovered him, he was already behind this subordinate. His Highness the Crown Prince asked this subordinate to pass on a message to you. He repeated Ji Yunhuang's words word for word. Ji Yunhao. His face felt like it had been slapped, it was burning hot. The three beauties who had been flattering him didn't dare to say anything when they saw him like this. The peach blossom beauty was a little bolder and said, "That little hussy's relatives are just a bunch of trash." It was normal that he couldn't do anything to her. "Prince, you don't have to take it to heart. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the crown prince just happened to pass by. Get lost." Ji Yunhao suddenly smashed the table with his palm. The wine and dishes on the table shattered into pieces. The beauties left pathetically. Ji Yunhao's anger had yet to dissipate. Passing by. What the fuck? His Highness the Crown Prince could pass by someone's residence? She did not expect that the Crown Prince, who had always pursued perfection and had never placed anyone in his eyes, would actually be interested in that woman. He thought that what he had thrown away was just a rag. Who would have thought? He secretly clenched his teeth and slowly ordered, "This woman is a little strange. Send someone to keep a close eye on her. If there is any movement, quickly report back." For the next few days, Ning Xuema's days were leisurely and fulfilling. Chapter 31. Marquis Jingyuan's household had many things to do. Fortunately, she now had money and a rather capable old Zhou. All the chores were handled by old Zhou, and the important matters were reported to her. All the pavilions in Marquis Jingyuan's household had been repainted, and the servants who had been recruited had their own duties under old Zhou's guidance. It was chaotic but orderly. Old Zhou also swept away his previous decadence, as if he had been rejuvenated. His back was perfectly straight, and he walked with vigor. His young miss had gone through such a disaster, and it was as if she had been reborn. She finally had the aura of a general's daughter. In the future, their Marquis Jingyuan's household would no longer be bullied. More importantly, he didn't know where young miss had learned her medical skills, which could be called miraculous. Old Zhong's back was originally a little hunched, but Ning Xuema had only inserted a few needles into his body, and unexpectedly, his perennial hunchback was cured. Old Zhong felt as if he was 10 years younger. His voice was a lot louder, and he was even more grateful to his young miss. He spared no effort to take care of everything in the Marquis Jingyuan's household. In just 10 days, the Marquis Jingyuan's household was already on the right track. Ning Xuema actually wasn't idle these few days. She was concocting all kinds of medicine, buying all kinds of tools, and of course, she also refined a pile of poison. Her body was weak now, and her skills were shallow. Although the Marquis Jingyuan's household seemed to be on the right track, in fact, she didn't know how many undercurrents were surging around. There were many people who wanted to kill her, and then trample her back into the mud. She had to add more insurance for herself. In the situation where her skills were weak, poison was indispensable to her. Of course, in her free time, she also cultivated her own skills. Because the cultivation method was special, she didn't want other people to see it. Fortunately, she had a special cultivation room, and every day, she would cultivate inside for 4 hours. There were many people in the Marquis Jingyuan's household, and there were also people eyeing covetously from outside. In order to prevent people from trespassing into her cultivation room and medicine room, Ning Xuema set up Zhuge Liang's 8-front formation around these 2 rooms. This continent probably had something to do with cultivating techniques, so they didn't pay attention to formations. Even if 2 armies were to face off, they would only use the most common formation, and didn't know anything about those mysterious formations. So no matter how the almighty shadow guards thought of all sorts of methods, they were still unable to get within 5 feet of these 2 places. As a result, the report that Ji Yunhao received was as follows. After Miss Ning woke up today, she entered an octagonal pavilion and stayed there for 6 hours. Afterwards, she entered a small building covered by green trees and stayed there for 6 hours. I don't know what kind of formation was set up in those 2 places, but every time I secretly followed them, I would have hallucinations, so I couldn't go in to take a look. Magic array. Ji Yunhao held his breath and frowned. In this world, only conjurers whose psychokinesis had reached the 3rd level of the Earth rank could form a trapping array. In the vast Sky Empire, there were very few people who could set up this kind of array, only 3 or 4 of them. One of them was the Crown Prince, while the others held important positions in various large sects and rarely left the mountain. That trashy girl could actually form a magic array. This was too heaven-defying. Are you sure? Is it really a spell formation? He asked in a deep voice. The Shadow Guard pondered for a moment, then honestly said, it's somewhat similar to a spell formation, but not too similar. Legend has it that the spell formation uses talismans as the medium, and psychokinesis as the main body. I heard that people who enter the spell formation will be injured by the spell, and won't be able to distinguish north from south. But this Miss Ning's spell formation seems to have been set up with the help of those flowers, trees, pavilions, and boulders. There are many forks in the road, and it's impossible to tell which one is the correct one. I feel that if we use psychokinesis to destroy those flowers, trees, and other things, we should be able to break it. But if we do that, we will inevitably alarm the people of the Marquis Jingyuan's household, so I don't dare to act rashly. Chapter 32. Ji Yunhao's face was as calm as water as he asked the Shadow Guard a few more questions. For example, everything that the Marquis Jingyuan's estate had recently purchased and the movements of the other people in the estate. This time, the Shadow Guard's answers were very specific and he directly handed Ji Yunhao the list that he had secretly recorded. When Ji Yunhao finished looking at the list, his face almost turned green. The other things like tables and chairs were easy to deal with. After all, she was just decorating the Marquis Jingyuan's estate. She actually bought countless knives and scissors, countless bags of embroidery needles, countless kinds of thin threads, as well as various bottles and jars. The most important thing was, he didn't know if that lass wanted to open a medicine shop, but she actually bought 10 caddies of all the common and uncommon herbs in the world. Ji Yunhao looked at the densely packed list and felt dizzy. He simply couldn't see what that lass was trying to do. He had also heard that she had helped that second aunt reattach her broken arm, but he didn't know how effective it was. After all, that second aunt was currently in the Supreme Court and was being closely guarded. Because it was the Crown Prince's orders, even Ji Yunhao's people couldn't go in to check. That lass really had amazing medical skills. That's impossible. How come he had never heard of her before? Could it be that the Crown Prince had deliberately set up a puzzle, using that lass as a ruse? Ji Yunhuang's thoughts were not something that ordinary people could guess. After sending the Shadow Guard away, he sat on the chair and pondered for a long time, but he still couldn't think of a reason. Your Highness is in a good mood, admiring the moon in the garden at this time. A delicate voice sounded and a green-clothed girl came out from the corner. This girl's eyebrows were delicate and her figure was slim. Walking out in such a graceful manner, she was also beautiful. Her foot seemed to be tripped by something and she cried out in pain. She staggered and fell into Ji Yunhao's arms. Hugging a soft and fragrant body, Ji Yunhao's expression also became gentle. Dai Chang, why are you here? Your Highness hasn't seen Dai Chang for several days already. Dai Chang could only deliver herself to your doorstep. Hu Dai Chang pouted. This prince has indeed been busy these few days and neglected you. I'll compensate you now. Ji Yunhao didn't say anything else and kissed her while his hands carelessly rubbed her body. Io, you're so naughty. You're bullying me again. Hu Dichang's pretty face was bright red. She giggled in his arms, but her pair of small hands seemed to want to resist him. Ji Yunhao was also in high spirits. The more he took advantage of her, the angrier he got. seeing that the heavenly lightning was about to trigger the earthly fire, Hu Daichang suddenly grabbed his naughty hand and stopped him from continuing. Your Highness, we can't continue like this. After all, we haven't gotten married yet. Ji Yunhao's mood was interrupted, and his tone wasn't very good. Daichang, this prince will definitely marry you. After a few, let Imperial Father grant us a marriage. This prince will definitely not let you down. You see, for you, this prince has even cancelled the marriage with the concubine. Your Highness, Daichang is doing this for your own good. If that trash really becomes the 6th king's concubine, she will lose face for the 6th king's palace. This servant is not willing to be sisters with the trash. Hu Daichang curled her lips, her tone filled with disdain for Ning Xuemo. Trash. Was that girl really trash? Ning Xuemo's smiling eyes flashed in front of Ji Yunhao's eyes, and then he thought of the news he had heard in the past few days. His heart suddenly felt somewhat irritated, and he was somewhat lost in thought. Your Highness. Your Highness. Hu Daichang waved her small hand in front of his eyes, and he finally came back to his senses. Thank you to Raging Flamestone and other local tyrants for your tips. Mumu has nothing to repay you with, so I added a chapter to express my gratitude. Chapter 33. The girl in his arms was disheveled and her snow-white skin was faintly discernible. He suddenly lost interest and gently pushed her away. All right, Daichang, it's already late. You should go back. Otherwise, it won't be good if someone finds out. He was actually absent-minded while holding her. This was something that had never happened before. Hu Daichang suddenly felt uncertain and flustered. Her watery eyes turned and she hugged his arm. Your Highness, this servant has learned a new method of brewing tea. I want your Highness to have a taste of this servant's skills. Ji Yunhao nodded and readily agreed. All right, let's go to Crane Gazing Pavilion tomorrow. This prince wants to see if my beloved concubine's skills have improved. Hu Daichang smiled sweetly and finally left in satisfaction. Her martial arts weren't low. Her figure flashed a few times in the garden and disappeared without a trace. Ji Yunhao looked at her back and let out a sigh of relief. He shouldn't have made the wrong choice. This girl should be his official concubine. Hu Daichang was the most favored daughter of the current Grand Marshal, Hu Qinghua. Hu Qinghua was originally a general under Ning Xuemo's father, Marquis Jing Yuan. He was brave and skilled in battle. His intelligence was outstanding and he was also good at managing the government. After Marquis Jing Yuan died, he took over Marquis Jing Yuan's official title and became the new Grand Marshal. With military power in hand, he held great power. He was a person with real power in the imperial court. He was also someone that the princes wanted to win over. Being able to capture the heart of his daughter, Hu Daichang, was also a fluke. Hu Daichang originally liked his third brother, the Crown Prince. However, the Crown Prince didn't put Hu Daichang in his eyes. He embarrassed her several times and finally made her give up. Ji Yunhao took advantage of this and captured the heart of the beauty. Hu Daichang had a good family background, good looks, and talent. She was also so gentle and lovely. She was a good match for him. Therefore, he doted on her and loved her. He risked being scolded by his imperial father to think of a way to cancel Ning Xuemo's engagement. This girl was the one he wanted. That Ning Xuemo wasn't even worthy of carrying her shoes. It wasn't wrong for him to cancel the engagement. The Crane Gazing Pavilion was the largest and most tasteful tea house in the capital of vast Sky Country. The hardware and software here were all top-notch. Of course, it was also the most expensive. Even a cup of ordinary tea here would cost 10 taels of silver, which was equivalent to the monthly salary of an intermediate martial master. The people who came here to drink tea were either rich or respectable, and they were the kind of people who would throw away their money like this. Ning Xuemo sat in a tea house on the second floor. She looked at the small red clay pot in front of her with a pained expression. She sniffed the aroma of the tea and sighed softly. Ordering tea here was different from ordering tea in modern times. In modern times, they ordered tea by the type of tea, but here, they ordered the type of pot. She casually selected the small red clay pot and walked upstairs. Ning Xuemo finally understood why the surrounding customers looked at her so strangely when she ordered this pot of tea when the tea brewer carried the tea set up on a golden plate inlaid with jewels as if it were a peerless treasure. What the fuck, this is actually the most valuable one. Here, a teapot made from red clay was more valuable than any other tea set. A pot of tea made from this kind of teapot actually cost 1,000 taels of silver. Although Ning Xuemo had just made a fortune, her recent expenses were not small. In just half a month's time, she had already spent 3/4 of her 2,000 taels of gold. Now, she only had 500 taels left. Here, 500 taels of gold was equivalent to 2,500 taels of silver. She deeply felt that she could no longer sit around and eat until she ran out of money. Therefore, she came out today to look for business opportunities to make money. Chapter 34. When she was tired from walking around the streets, she strolled to this tea house to rest and have a cup of tea to moisten her throat. Who would have thought that a pot of tea would cost her 1,000 taels of silver? She was in so much pain. No wonder after she ordered this pot of tea, the waiter respectfully welcomed her upstairs. It seemed like he really thought of her as a fat sheep to be slaughtered. Fortunately, the fine tea and snacks here were complimentary, or else she would feel even more pain. The tea house on the second floor was indeed a place for the rich. The design of the tea house was strange. The 4 bamboo walls were hung with famous calligraphy and paintings. The calligraphy and paintings of this world were similar to that of ancient China. The paintings were done with fine brushwork, and the words were written with bold cursive script. The calligraphy and paintings hanging here were also by famous masters. Ning Xuemo had heard of a few of them before. Every piece of calligraphy and painting was worth a lot. Any one of them could be exchanged for a few thousand taels of silver. Among these calligraphy and paintings, the landscape painting hanging in the middle was the largest and most conspicuous. It was a landscape painting with splashed ink. The mountains were stacked on top of each other, and the clouds and mist were rising. There were strange trees and strange rocks, and mountain streams. All of them were majestic and full of spiritual energy. It made people feel as if they were in the mountains. There was a line of words inscribed in the corner. The words were like dragons and snakes. They were elegant and had a proud character like a winter plum blossom. The inscription was the number of years the painting was done and the name of the painter. Han Shangyue. Ning Xuemo read out the name of the painter. She knew that this was a leading figure in the world of calligraphy and painting. It was equivalent to Su Beihong and Qi Baishi in her era. Any one of their paintings could be exchanged for a few mansions, and it was extremely difficult to find one. It seemed like this tea house had indeed spent a lot of money to improve the taste of the entire tea house. Ning Xuemo drank a mouthful of tea and swallowed a piece of snack. Suddenly, she felt that the 1,000 taels of silver was not so painful. Money was a bastard. She could still earn money after spending it. With her ability, why would she be afraid of not being able to earn money in this era? Moreover, she had just inquired about a way to earn money. She heard that there were countless herbs in the Tianshu mountain, which was 100 miles away from the main city. There was no lack of precious herbs. In a few days, she would go there and take a look. Perhaps she would be lucky enough to pick some extremely rare ones. If that happened, she would have struck it rich. However, she heard that there were a lot of magical beasts in the mountains. Many herb gatherers who went there never returned. This caused the medicinal herbs produced there to be very scarce in the market. If she wanted to go there, she had to prepare well. She couldn't act blindly. She transmigrated here to laugh at the world, not to feed the magical beasts. She lowered her head and was thinking about the next step of making money when the light at the door dimmed. Two people walked in hand. Both of them were dressed in luxurious clothes. The man had a tall and straight figure and a handsome face. His eagle-like eyes exuded the dignity of a superior person. When he turned around, they radiated radiance in all directions. The woman's hair was tied up in a bun, and her makeup was exquisite. Every movement of hers had the demeanor of a noble lady. The layout of this tea house was unique, like a modern music tea house. There were translucent screens and potted plants between the tea houses. Ning Xuema was sitting near the window, in a relatively quiet corner. Therefore, when the two people came in, they did not see her. Ning Xuema only glanced at the two people before withdrawing her gaze. The sixth prince, Ji Yunhao, was her body's former fiancé. He no longer had any relationship with her. Her energy was limited, so she would not pay attention to irrelevant people. As for the woman beside him, the corners of Ning Xuema's mouth slightly hooked up. She picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. Chapter 35. The corners of Ning Xuema's lips curled up slightly. She picked up the teacup and took a sip. She closed her eyes and listened to the zither playing from behind the beaded curtains. The zither playing skills of a zither player here were naturally at the pinnacle of perfection. The sound of the zither was like flowing water, leisurely drifting through the fragrance of the tea, giving people a rare sense of tranquility. Ning Xuema knew how to play the zither. After all, when she was in the modern era, she liked to listen to some ancient music in her free time. What zither, pipa, arrow, piano, as long as it was light music, she liked to listen to it. She even played a few pieces herself as a form of entertainment. Although she had never heard the zither playing this piece before, it had the advantage of being quiet and secluded. It could cleanse the soul. She felt that drinking tea and listening to this would allow her to calm down and think about her own matters. The other customers in the tea house were also quietly listening and occasionally whispering to each other. Paw! A crisp sound broke the silence of the mountain forest. Everyone was startled and turned to look at the source of the sound. That tea set was used by someone else. Didn't I tell you to keep a red clay tea set? Miss Hu Daichang was angry. The waiter who had brought the tea set for their table looked at the broken teacup on the ground with heartache and retorted in a low voice, Miss Hu, this set is the red clay tea set that you often use. You never used the bamboo red clay tea set, so I gave it to another customer to use. Just because I often use this set doesn't mean I'll use it again this time. Since I told you to keep it, you have to keep it for me. Hurry up and get that tea set back, wash it properly and send it to me. If you say another word, I'll break your dog leg. Hu Daichang wanted to show off her prestige as the daughter of a great general in front of Ji Yunhao, so she became more and more aggressive. General Hu's power reached the heavens, and the sixth prince was a member of the imperial family. These two people were not people the waiter could afford to offend. He could only run down to report to his manager. A moment later, a scholarly-looking middle-aged scholar who was dressed even more elegantly than his appearance walked over with quick steps. He first greeted the sixth prince and Miss Hu before walking to Ning Xuema's tea table. He sized her up without batting an eyelid. Today, Ning Xuema was wearing a light pink muslin dress, which made her small face look even more tender and tender. She looked like a pure and innocent child, so he did not take it to heart. He cupped his fist and said, "This young customer, I'm really sorry. Your tea set has already been ordered by someone, but the servant forgot about it and sent it to you. Now, the original owner wants to take it back. Do you think you can let go of your tea set? I'll give you another pot of good tea as an apology. Ning Xuemo, Miss Hu's words, her small mouth, manager, this is your fault. I clearly heard that the customer over there didn't order this tea set in the beginning. How did it become that they had already ordered this tea set? Originally, I didn't care much about this tea set. If you told me the truth, I might have happily given it up. But now, you're blatantly lying. You obviously think I'm a child who's easy to bully. I don't want to give up this tea set anymore. The manager was stunned. He had thought that she was easy to fool because of her young age and amiable appearance. Who would have thought that her words would be so sharp? An awkward expression appeared on his face. Before he could say anything, Hu Daichang heard the commotion and walked over. Chapter 36. Hu Daichang heard the commotion and walked over. She looked down at Ning Xuemo and said, "Oh, I was wondering who dared to steal my tea set. So it's you, the trash. Shopkeeper, you're in the wrong here. Your tea house is a place where high officials and nobles come. How can you let this kind of trash in?" The thick disdain in her tone was like aged vinegar, spreading to every corner of the tea house. Countless eyes looked over and fell on Ning Xuemo. There was suspicion, bewilderment, and confusion in their eyes. Ning Xuemo had become famous recently. Many people had seen her true face when she was carried through the streets in an iron cage. However, at that time, Ning Xuemo's hair was disheveled and her face was red and swollen. She was so embarrassed that it was almost impossible to recognize her human form. How could she be as fresh as now? It was no wonder that most people didn't recognize her. Hu Daichang saw everyone's gaze and became even more proud. "Everyone, she is Ning Xuemo from Marquis Ning Jingyuan's mansion who was caught stealing a man a few days ago. This kind of trash is actually drinking tea in the same tea house as us. Don't you think we should ask the shopkeeper to drive her out?" Everyone looked at each other. Ning Xuemo's incident a few days ago was well known throughout the city. They naturally knew about it. However, didn't it prove that Miss Ning was wrongly accused? Although everyone looked down on trash, seeing Hu Daichang so arrogantly bully a little girl made them look down on her. Most people didn't respond. Only a few people who wanted to flatter the sixth prince and Hu Daichang responded, "Yes, yes, drive her out. Drive her out. Such a person doesn't deserve to stay in this tea house. Get out quickly." Hu Daichang was flattered by these people and became even more proud. Her gaze fell on Ning Xuemo's face again. She wanted to see her trembling in anger or being scared silly. However, she didn't expect that Ning Xuemo was still sitting there calmly, playing with a cup of tea in her hand. She looked at her as if she was watching a monkey play. Such a gaze pierced Hu Daichang's heart. She said angrily, "Why are you looking at me like that? Feeling guilty?" Ning Xuemo smiled and said softly, "Who are you calling a slut?" "Bitch, I'm talking about you." Hu Daichang replied without thinking. "As expected, the slut is talking about me." Ning Xuemo's voice was crisp and clear, like a string of silver bells ringing. "Since you've admitted it yourself, then I won't say anything more about you. Take care of yourself and try to get rid of this word as soon as possible." Poochie. Ha! Someone in the tea house couldn't help but laugh. This little girl's counterattack was really ruthless. Hu Daichang finally reacted. Her pretty face flushed red, and she couldn't help but raise her hand to slap her. "You little bitch." Her movements were extremely fast, and her hand was like the wind. This time, she used her telekinesis and was determined to break Ning Xuemo's white teeth. However, Ning Xuemo only raised her hand slightly. Before Hu Jichang's palm could touch her, she suddenly screamed and hurriedly withdrew her hand. It hurts. It hurts so much. Her palm felt like it had been stung by a wasp. It hurts so much that she wanted to stomp her feet. Little bitch, you dare to plot against me? Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. Hu Daichang, what are you doing now? You were the one who wanted to hit me, okay? You're dead. You little bitch, you actually used needles to stab me. Carrot. Chapter 37. Where did I prick you with the needle? Show it to everyone. Hu Daichang raised the hand that was pricked as if she was raising a flag. You slut, don't even think about denying it. You pricked my palm. When she opened her palm, she discovered that her palm was ruddy. Not to mention a needle mark, there wasn't even a red dot to be seen. Everyone's eyes were sharp. They looked at her palm and then back at her with suspicion in their eyes. Hu Daichang also discovered this abnormality. She withdrew her hand and looked at it in disbelief. She was stunned. Ning Xuemo sighed softly and suddenly looked in the direction of the tea house not far away. Sixth Prince, your future princess consort was pricked. Aren't you going to come out and take a look? Show some concern. The sixth prince's future princess consort. Everyone's eyes widened as they followed Ning Xuemo's gaze. The sixth prince, Ji Yunhao, wanted to strangle Hu Daichang to death. He and Hu Daichang were not engaged yet. If this was exposed in advance, it would be detrimental to his reputation. After all, he had just broken off his engagement with Ning Xuemo. However, since Ning Xuemo had called him out, he could only brace himself and come out. His gaze fell on Ning Xuemo and slightly narrowed. He hadn't seen her for more than 10 days, but this girl had become much more lively. Her once emaciated face was now much more tender. Her once excessively thin chin now had a perfect curve. Perhaps it was because of the hot weather, but her white cheeks had a faint blush. Her eyes were big and curved, and the black pupils inside were as black as ink and as pure as water. When she looked at people, she was like a calm lake, giving people an indescribable sense of tranquility. The wind from outside the window blew in, causing her pink clothes to flutter in the wind. She looked innocent, well-behaved, and completely harmless. Her appearance was clearly the same, but her temperament was very different from before. At such a young age, she seemed to have the power to captivate people's souls, making people unable to move their eyes away. Ji Yunhao calmed himself down and his face sank. He opened his mouth and reprimanded, Ning Xuemo, what nonsense are you talking about? Ning Xuemo blinked her eyes innocently. How could it be nonsense? Sixth Prince, this Miss Hu Daichang even has a child with you. Don't tell me you don't plan to marry her. Wasn't it because of her that you tried so hard to break off the engagement? Shocking thunder. He had a baby. In other words, the sixth prince and Miss Hu Daichang didn't just get together these few days, but had been having an affair for a long time. Everyone's eyes became brighter and more subtle. Hu Jichang's pretty face flushed red. She was indeed pregnant, but it was only a little more than a month. She thought that she wouldn't show it, but she didn't expect Ning Xuemo to expose her. She couldn't help but feel ashamed and angry. Ning Xuemo, how dare you? How dare you make irresponsible remarks? Ji Yunhao was also stunned, and his handsome face turned even darker. In Chongkong country, regardless of whether the two parties were engaged or not, losing one's virginity before marriage was the most despicable act. One would be reviled by tens of thousands of people. Even if the man had 3 wives and 4 concubines, if he had a relationship with an innocent girl without any status, he would also be despised by everyone. Ning Xuemo, do you know what kind of punishment you will receive for speaking nonsense? Ji Yunhao's voice was as cold as ice. Ning Xuemo's expression became even more innocent. I know, but I didn't speak nonsense. What I said was the truth. Miss Hu is clearly 45 days pregnant. She tilted her head slightly, causing the two buns on her head to sway slightly. She blinked her eyes and suddenly had a look of realization. Could it be that the baby in her belly isn't yours? Chapter 38. Hu Daichang, Ji Yunhao, everyone. Hu Daichang was shocked and angry. Ning Xuemo was right about the pregnancy date. How did she know? The doctor who had taken her pulse had clearly been killed in time. Ning Xuemo, you dare to slander my reputation. I'm going to kill you. Hu Daichang's palm flashed and a sword appeared. She swung it at Ning Xuemo. Ji Yunhao raised his hand to stop her, but he thought of something and his eyes flashed. He didn't make a move. However, Ning Xuemo was already prepared for this. Just as the sword was about to pierce her neck, she suddenly lowered her body, causing Hu Daichang's killing blow to hit nothing but air. Hu Daichang couldn't stop her sword and stabbed the red clay pot on the table. Paw! A crisp sound rang out and the red clay pot shattered into pieces. Two of the teacups were also broken. Miss Hu, are you angry out of humiliation? It doesn't matter if you get angry and break the shop's precious tea set, but don't get angry and harm your body. It won't be good if the baby is affected. Ning Xuemo's body spun around before she sat back down. She looked at Hu Daichang and spoke in a serious tone. Hu Daichang. She was about to go crazy. She was so angry that her lips were trembling. You still want to talk nonsense? Little slut, if I don't kill you today, I'm not human. Hu Daichang flicked her wrist and the sword in her hand emitted a sword light that was about a foot long. It attacked Ning Xuemo like a storm. Ning Xuemo's body was like a willow in the wind as she dodged the sword light. There were several times when the sword light was about to hit her, but she dodged it by a hair's breadth. Seeing Hu Daichang's sword coming at her again, she let out a soft cry. The chair she was sitting on suddenly flipped over, and her body slid out like a fish, escaping the encirclement of Hu Daichang's sword. She slid past Hu Daichang like the wind. Hu Daichang's ankle seemed to have been stung by something. A thread of pain shot up from the stung area and into her abdomen. She was in so much pain that her face turned white. With a cry of pain, she threw away the sword and hugged her stomach. She bent over and almost wanted to roll on the ground. Daichang, what's wrong? Ji Yunhao subconsciously supported her. Hu Daichang felt a warm current flowing out from the secret place between her legs. Was she really going to have a miscarriage? She was so scared that her face turned pale. She blurted out, our child is gone." The moment he said that, everyone in the hall fell silent. Really? It was actually real. Originally, they were still a little skeptical of Ning Xuemo's words, but now, the evidence was irrefutable. Everyone looked at Hu Daichang with disdain. This stupid woman. Ji Yunhao cursed in his heart, but he couldn't do anything about it. He lowered his voice and said to Ning Xuemo, "Good, you're ruthless enough. If anything happens to her, this prince won't let you off." Ning Xuemo also became angry. Ji Yunhao, Hu Daichang, the two of you secretly colluded with each other and had an affair for a long time. In order to achieve your goal, you came to frame me, wanting to ruin my reputation. Fortunately, the heavens opened their eyes and allowed the chastity-testing beast to prove my innocence. Otherwise, I would have suffered an unjust injustice. I'm an orphan girl. My arms can't twist the thighs of you nobles. I also despise your conduct. That's why I did as you wished. I quickly broke off the engagement and let you, this adulterous pair, get what you wanted. You're still not satisfied and bully an orphan girl like me. Do you really think that there's no justice in this world? Do you really think that you can cover the sky with one hand? Everyone here can testify for me. She was clearly the one who provoked me. She slapped and chopped at me. It was as if she wanted to kill me to silence me. I didn't even fight back. She used up all her strength. What does it have to do with me if the fetus is affected? How can this be blamed on me? Chapter 39. Her big eyes were filled with tears. You shouldn't bully people like this, right? Hu Dai-chang, I used to treat you as a good friend. When I was 7 years old, you chased after me and called me big sister. You even said that although I was younger than you, my birthday was older than yours, so you should call me little big sister and respect me. You even said that you would always be my best friend and call me little big sister. Is this how you treat little big sister? I always gave in to you and tolerated you. You stole my fiancé, but I didn't want to argue with you. You always bullied me, but I also gave in to you. I just wanted to settle things peacefully. Who would have thought that you would work together to scheme against me? Now you even want to threaten me and frame me. She clearly looked like she was about to cry, but her words were like exploding beans. She spoke quickly, but each word was clear. Every word was like a bullet, hitting people's hearts. So it was like this. So the truth was like this. Everyone suddenly understood. They looked at Ji Yunhao and Hu Dai-chang with even more disdain. Ji Yunhao's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He was also a smart person. Although the matter of Ning Xuemo being wronged wasn't done by him, he could already guess who did it. Other than the woman in his arms, there was no one else, but he couldn't say it out loud. After all, he still had a use for her in the future. He still wanted to marry Hu Dai-chang and obtain Marshal Hu's support. Originally, he wanted to casually find a scapegoat to smooth over this matter. In any case, he could at least explain himself. However, he did not expect that Ning Xuemo would reveal the matter between him and Hu Dai-chang at this moment. Faintly, she also pinned the main culprit of that matter on him. Unfortunately, he still could not explain. The people drinking tea in this tea house were all famous people in the imperial city. He couldn't silence them one by one. His gaze fell on Ning Xuemo's body, and a cold light flashed through his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, but Hu Dai-chang felt a warm flow down there. She didn't care about anything else and couldn't help grabbing his sleeve. Her voice trembled as she said, "Your Highness, save our child." "I'm bleeding." Ji Yunhao subconsciously lowered his head and saw that Hu Dai-chang's skirt was wet. "What's that smell?" Someone muttered in a low voice and wrinkled his nose. "Why does it smell like urine?" Someone asked, fanning his nose in disgust. "Miss Hu, are you sure you're bleeding? Not urinary incontinence." Ning Xuemo also took a step back, her little nose wrinkling slightly. However, he sneered in his heart. This ungrateful woman. At that time, Hu Dai-chang was also poor. Her father was seriously ill and she was begging on the streets. She was molested by a lecher. Coincidentally, Ning Xuemo, who was 6 years old at the time, saw it and sent people to save her. The original owner of the body, Ning Xuemo, was kind-hearted. Seeing that Hu Dai-chang was pitiful, not only did she invite a doctor to treat her father's illness, but she also brought Hu Dai-chang and her father to Marquis Jingyuan's mansion. It was because of this that Hu Dai-chang's father had the opportunity to climb up the social ladder. It was also because of this that Hu Dai-chang and her father were where they were today. At that time, Hu Daichang followed behind Ning Xuemo every day. She, a 13-year-old girl, chased after Ning Xuemo, a 7-year-old girl, and tried her best to curry favor with Ning Xuemo. However, she didn't expect that before Marquis Jingyuan's mansion fell, Hu Daichang would always have a disdainful look on her face whenever she saw Ning Xuemo. She would often bully her openly and secretly, humiliate her in front of others, and even beat her up because of a small retort. Ning Xuemo was beaten black and blue and almost lost her life. Chapter 40. In order to snatch Ning Xuemo's fiancé, she had used all kinds of underhanded methods to kill Ning Xuemo. The reason why Ning Xuemo had been drugged and locked in an iron cage was all because of her. How could Ning Xuemo be polite to this kind of woman? She had purposely hit an acupuncture point on Hu Daichang's leg to make her lose control of her urine. At this time, she wouldn't let her have a miscarriage. However, the child in her belly would sooner or later become a stone fetus and stay in her belly forever. She would no longer have the ability to give birth. This was the justice that Ning Xuemo wanted for the original owner of this body. That girl couldn't die in vain like this. For a rich young miss to lose control of her urine in front of so many people was the most shameful thing. She had thrown her face all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Seeing that everyone was looking at her skirt, Hu Daichang had never been so embarrassed in her life. She even had the heart to dig a hole in the ground. Her pretty face was green and white, her chest was heaving up and down. Suddenly, she covered her face and cried. Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows in confusion. It's just incontinence, not a real miscarriage. Why are you crying? Pa! A golden shadow flashed in the air and whipped towards Ning Xuemo. This golden shadow appeared too suddenly without any warning. By the time Ning Xuemo noticed it, it was already too late to dodge. She only managed to avoid the important part. The golden shadow whipped her back, causing her to stagger. Ning Xuemo quickly steadied herself and raised her head. She saw Ji Yunhao standing in front of her with a whip-shaped golden shadow flickering in his palm. Ning Xuemo, apologize. Ning Xuemo's back felt like it had been stung by a hornet. She couldn't help but look back. She knew that her back was bleeding. Why? Ning Xuemo's fingers slowly clenched. Why did this bastard hit her? And under the watchful eyes of so many people, based on the fact that I was once your fiancé, I have the right to teach you a lesson on behalf of your parents. The golden whip in Ji Yunhao's hand flashed again, and lashed towards Ning Xuemo's body. This time, Ning Xuemo was prepared. She instinctively wanted to use the mystifying steps that she had learned in the modern era. However, the moment she moved, the spot on her back that was hit suddenly stiffened. Following that, her legs went numb and she was unable to move. She could only raise her arm to block at the critical moment. Ning Xuemo looked at her tattered sleeve. The skin under her sleeve had a reddish-purple color, and an intense pain accompanied by numbness and itchiness spread throughout her entire arm. Was there poison on his strange golden whip? It actually made it difficult for her to move. Ning Xuemo, this prince will say one more thing. Hurry up and apologize to Daichang. Ji Yunhao gripped his golden whip and took a step forward. He was like a jade-faced Azura, his baleful aura threatening. Your Highness, I don't want this slut's apology. Beat her to death. Beat her to death. Hu Daichang clamored from the side. Ning Xuemo retreated a step, but because her legs were weak, she tripped and fell to the ground with a thump. The surrounding people let out soft hissing sounds, but no one dared to step forward and meddle in this matter. Whether it was the Grand Marshal's daughter or the sixth prince, they were not people they could provoke. The more influential a person was, the more things they feared. there were already people who were afraid of being caught in the crossfire and secretly went downstairs. Ning Xuemo's body was in intense pain and she was unable to raise her body. She opened her eyes to look at Ji Yunhao's murderous eyes and her heart turned cold. She had been too careless. She thought that these days she had already recovered 20 to 30% of her strength, and with her unfathomable qin gong, she would be able to protect herself from harm. She didn't expect that Ji Yunhao would actually use his psychokinesis to drive the soul-breaking whip to attack her in public. Chapter 41. She did not have any relatives or friends here. At this critical moment, she did not even have anyone to save her. Looking at Ji Yunhao's expression, even if she gave in and apologized to Hu Daichang, he would not let her go. He would definitely think of other ways to thoroughly humiliate her. Seeing that Ji Yunhao was about to whip her again, her lips slowly hooked into a sneer. Ji Yunhao, if I don't die, I will make you pay 10 times the price for today's whipping. Her gaze was too cold, causing Ji Yunhao's heart to turn cold. At the same time, there was also an inexplicable unwillingness and anger. This girl used to listen to everything he said. She used to secretly look at him. She used to secretly collect everything about him. Her heart used to be filled with him. Now, although she respectfully called him Prince, she looked at him as if she was looking at smelly garbage. She no longer had any feelings for him. But at this time, she still shone brightly, only her brilliance did not bloom for him. Since it was like this, he might as well just kill her. At least her gaze did not stop for other men. He was the only one who was her fiancé. Even if he killed her now, it would at most be considered a mistake. His imperial father would not punish him for an orphan. At most, he would be fined a few years of his salary and locked up for a few days. He could also use the excuse of regret and compensation to take this little girl as a concubine. That way, she would still be his even after death. Countless calculations could be made in a flash. Ji Yunhao's eyes flashed with murderous intent. The strange golden whip in his hand suddenly became as thick as a gossamer. He raised his arm and the golden whip swam in the air like a snake, whipping towards Ning Xuemo's neck. Ning Xuemo's entire body was already numb with pain. Unable to dodge, she could only close her eyes. She did not expect that she would die here today. Hu Dichang's eyes flashed with crazy pride. She was very clear about the power of Ji Yunhao's whip. As long as it really hit Ning Xuemo, it would directly break her throat and kill her. Seeing that Ji Yunhao's whip was about to kiss Ning Xuemo's neck like a viper, a light blue radiance suddenly flashed in the air. In the blink of an eye, a protective shield formed in front of Ning Xuemo's body. Ji Yunhao's deadly whip hit the protective shield, causing it to ripple like water. Ji Yunhao's hand trembled, and the golden whip almost flew out of his hand. His expression changed as he took a step back. Brother Crown Prince. A shadow flashed at the door as Ji Yunhuang slowly walked in. Today, he was wearing a low-key yet gorgeous thin robe. He still wore that huge jade ring on his thumb, and the jasper on his waist was like a pool of flowing water. His gentle temperament carried an indescribable sense of nobility and indifference. We pay our respects to Your Highness the Crown Prince. Everyone in the tea room knelt down, including Ji Yunhao. Hu Dichang's watery eyes flashed with a hint of complexity. She naturally followed suit and knelt down. However, in a gentle voice, she said a few more words. Dai Chang pays her respects to Your Highness the Crown Prince. Your Highness the Crown Prince has graced us with his presence. Dai Chang did not kneel earlier to welcome you, please forgive me. She was unable to continue speaking because the Crown Prince whom she had respectfully welcomed did not even look at her. He directly walked past her and bent down to help Ning Xuemo up from the ground. Xuemo, how do you feel? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.